Hello, you are listening to KTAM Radio with your host Nacho the Squatcho. This is a playlist of imminent, fleeting Christmas of Winter of Sorrows or something like that. Playlist. Getting everything. You are listening to KTAM Radio. This is an adventure, martial arts, survivalist, and current events and esoterica, preternatural, UFO, conspiracy theorists, things that go lurking in the distant abysmal fog and creeping and making bumps in the night in the dark. Cryptid hunting and conspiracy theorists, alien hunting, everything and all of the above. KTAM Radio, survivalist and tactical, and subscribe if you have been working the midday oil all year long and you haven't had time to train and get on your Harley and go ride to Venice Beach and flexing and clanging and banging in the gym and all that, well, Uncle Squats is here to inform you how to get up to speed. So you's got to subscribe to KTAM Radio, Knife, Tomahawk, and Machete Survivalist Radio with your host, Nacho the Squatcho Official. So I got to admonish you guys and be a douchebag and ask you the favor for the little bit of gigabytes on your little phone that yuns go and subscribe and yuns like yuns channel for brought to you the Nacho the Squatcho Official and what the wild things do, because I'm Nacho the Squatcho and I love you. And I need subscribers so I can keep going live, so I could eventually probably get unalived by the Sasquatch, abominable snowman creature, or a pack of wild coyotes, and you guys can sit there and laugh. But for now, this playlist is dedicated to all the souls that shall be overwhelmed and drowned in the abysmal winter that comes before us. KT Radio presents Christmas in Heavy Metal Wonderland, or something I already forgot. You guys stay tuned. I need y'all to subscribe so I can keep going live. I tell you what, Nacho the Squatcho, and I love you. Whether you're Christian, atheist, Diabla, or Añalita, we live in the Western world. You are listening to KTAM Radio. This is an adventure, martial arts, survivalist, and current events and esoterica, preternatural, UFO, conspiracy theorists, things that go lurking in the distant abysmal fog and creeping and making bumps in the night in the dark. Cryptid hunting and
these pizzas got me.
I mean, that's so fast. If you could do that.
Well, there's arguments against, because it could be human-created technology, too, that's just 15, 20, 30 years out. Like the stealth bomber was developed secretly. So what defies, it's our perception of its movement capabilities is what defies. But there could be some tricks on perception that's the whole point with a stealth bomber, is it's difficult to detect.
Sure.
And so there could be same kind of tricks on perception, that you could just be playing different kinds of amazing, secret, human-created technology that is able to deceive the human eye.
That's a good point. I mean, but the thing about it is they tracked it. It wasn't just that it was the human eye that saw this and it's deceptive, but also like the stealth bomber, the way it's designed, it blocks radar, or radar doesn't catch onto it. I think it is possible that some human-created technology that's so far advanced from anything that we're currently that we currently understand, like in terms of like mainstream propulsion experts and fighter pilots like David Fravor and military people, it is possible that some civilization, one of the big civilizations on this planet, whether it's China or Russia, has come up with something that's above and beyond what everybody knows. But it's not likely. It's not likely that they've made that much of a leap.
In your sense, on the other side, if it's alien technology, see, I'm more optimistic. To me, as a scientist and engineer, and actually David Fravor says this too, in this time of pandemic, in this time of like just hard negative news everywhere, there will be nothing more inspiring than the government in an inspiring, like Neil deGrasse Tyson way, coming out and saying we have not releasing the videos like they did, which is, I don't know if you know, but they just put videos on the website. Like there's nothing. It's just videos. It's just like with like some boring documents that describe.
One individual lost his father, and he was in the middle of an exorcism. This is all baloney, is what he said in his mind. He didn't even say it. And the demoniac snapped to attention and spoke in perfect Malay, called him by name, and said, "I was there when your father passed away. And I was the one that made him pull the trigger." Shape-shifted right in front of him and scared Albert Bender to death, and he shut all of his research down. And this man, who was 6'4", parapsychologist for 40 years, found on the floor in the fetal position, crying uncontrollably. Only thing he could say was, "They were here, they were here, they were here." If you keep this up, you're gonna get a terminal illness. It's gonna look like it was natural, but we want you to know it was us. If you don't stop, we're gonna remove you. Coming out of his chest, "Give me your soul." We just want you to know that our guide said that they'll be waiting for you when you die.
Government continually blocks congressional elected officials, people that we voted for, from looking at and disclosing the data we have on unidentified flying objects. This isn't about conspiracy theory. This is about what's really going on in the skies and in the water. Because high-ranking military veterans, maybe you have never heard this before, are claiming that they're having contact with what they're calling interdimensional beings. And at the same time, we have this object coming through the sky that NASA's calling a comet, although it doesn't look like a comet. The data doesn't show it as a comet. And why is NASA blocking us from actually looking at images of this thing? What are we dealing with? What is really going on in the skies? And what does the Bible talk about? So I want to get into this with you. Hit the like button and stay with me, because we need to be open to what's really going on and how true the Bible really is. Let's check it out. So first, we're going to have Anna Paulina Luna, a congresswoman, talking about how they're blocking Congress from actually looking at these videos and talking about it.
Joining us now for more, Florida Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna. It's been a busy day, Congresswoman. Good to see you. At this point,
nice to see you too.
Who are these people who are still blocking the truth from the public?
Well, to our knowledge, it is definitely members of the intelligence community. And then also, too, we were recently denied access out of the Department of War, stating that we didn't have access and the proper, I guess, need-to-know authorities to look at some of the classified footage that is out there. As you saw in that clip that you just showed, there's actually some footage that was dead dropped to Eric Burleson, of which he then provided it to the task force. And so all I have to say is, look, in the interest of national security and national defense, obviously this is something that we should question and look to find answers for, but also it also signifies a massive problem.
Guys, welcome to Black Scout Survival Late Night Live. Tonight we're going to be talking about something your government would really prefer you just scroll on past. The government just reopened, the circus lights are back on, and on the same day they crank the machine back up, and we get a dump of Epstein emails that raise serious questions about the relationship between Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump. Now, I'm not here to parrot Democrat talking points. I'm not here to push CNN narratives. I'm here to read the actual documents. Look at the timing. Look at the political behavior on both sides and ask the question nobody in D.C. wants to ask. Who is protecting who? Why does it feel like the truth is the one thing everybody's afraid of? So let's dig in. Now, number one, first quick battlefield picture. After playing the chicken shutdown game and pretending they were going to hold the line, Congress magically finds a way to reopen the government. Shocking, right? The money laundering never actually stops. But while everyone's clapping for themselves, House Democrats release a small batch of emails from Jeffrey Epstein's estate. communications between Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and various journalists and political figures. Then within hours, like clockwork, House Republicans answered by dropping 23,000 pages of Epstein-related documents of their own. Not because suddenly they love transparency, but because they're trying to control the blast radius and spin. And obviously it can drown out, 23,000 pages could really drown out a few emails that look pretty bad. So you've got two wings of the same vulture trying to weaponize the same dead pedophile for political points, while at the same time limiting what you actually see, right? That alone should tell you, man, something's off about this. Okay, let's start off with email number one, okay? The dog that hasn't barked is Trump. All right, first email here. This one is between Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell back in 2011. Epstein is frustrated that certain people haven't come up in the press or in investigations, and he writes a line that should make every American stop and think. He says, in essence, that the dog hasn't barked is Trump. And then a redacted victim's name, spent hours at my house with him, and he never once has been mentioned. Well, let's be precise here. Epstein is pointing out that a specific victim named Black Dog spent hours at the house with Trump present. And he's stunned that despite all the law enforcement, the press, the political heat, Trump's name has never been dragged into that particular detail. Now, that doesn't automatically mean that Trump committed a crime, but it absolutely means the narrative, oh yeah, I barely knew the guy, I kicked him out of Mar-a-Lago, no big deal, is not really the whole story, right? This is Epstein himself asking, why is nobody asking about Trump? That's not a left-wing blog. That's not a TikTok activist. That's the guy at the center of the operation wondering why one very powerful dog never barked. Now, email number two. Of course he knew about the girls, they say, right? Pop up email number two here. Fast forward to 2019. Epstein is emailing Michael Wolff, the journalist, and he's talking about a victim who worked at Mar-a-Lago. Epstein writes something to the effect of, Trump said he asked me to resign, that I was never a member. Of course he knew about the girls. He asked Ghislaine to stop it. Now let me translate that into plain English.
Julie, the shower ended 30 minutes ago.
I know, I'm sorry, but hear me out.
Nectar mattresses' unparalleled comfort may lead to...
Epstein is saying, Trump publicly claims I kicked Epstein out of.
So a lot developing in the last 24 hours regarding concerns of World War III, and we're hearing an emergency draft has been initiated. Take a look at the latest headlines with me. I'm going to be covering all the details of what has been going on here. World War III fears spark emergency conscription for all 18-year-olds in Germany. Here's another one coming out. Report for duty. Every 18-year-old man called up for military tests and emergency conscription measure announced in Germany amid World War III fears. It comes as major European players also ramp up conscription efforts. And everybody is asking the question, is there going to be a draft in the United States? If World War III erupts, these are the first U.S. citizens who would get drafted and go to battle. And let me know your thoughts. Do you think that we're going to need a draft here in the United States? Let me know your thoughts. We're hearing that this is being initiated right now in an emergency effort to keep up with potential World War III coming, is what we're hearing. And take a look at this. Warnings coming out to the United States and to the world here. Putin's Russia is preparing for a big war soon. Ukraine warns. And what they're saying is, let me know your thoughts on this. They are saying that they believe that Putin is ready to escalate to a major war, but he is waiting essentially for Donald Trump to get out of office. And that in the year 2029 or the year 2030, there is going to be a major war and that our adversaries will go all out. Do you think that's a possibility? If you think so, put yes. If you think no, put no. Let me know your thoughts. But we had even heard this morning coming out from the FBI for quite some time with China and Taiwan. China, they said, has prepared to attack Taiwan by the year 2027, which now is only about 1 year away. And they're saying, but the Trump effect might hold them off. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. But let's take a look at some more headlines here. As you can see, in addition to those warnings coming out, the Putin ally, he has issued just in the last 24 hours a nuclear warning to the United States. Yet again, we're getting all these nuclear warnings coming out from Russia. They're posturing against the United States. This
thing has a laser avoidance system.
Of the Epstein files are somehow even worse for President Trump than anything we've seen so far. But the real shocker was what Jeffrey Epstein planned to do to the president. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. We're going to read these emails and find out just what kind of guy old Jeffy was. Hint, not that great. So, headline from the New York Times, of course. Epstein alleged in emails that Trump knew of his conduct. God bless the New York Times. Don't ever change. Don't try to make this easy to understand at all. Which his contact, Epstein or Trump? Come on, guys. Right? So, this is just sort of sideways, but here's how these came to be. House Democrats on Wednesday released emails in which Jeffrey Epstein wrote that President Trump, quote, had spent hours at my house with one of Mr. Epstein's victims, among other messages that made it pretty clear that the convicted sex offender believed Trump knew all about more about his abuse than he has acknowledged. God, who writes for the New York Times, man? Man, you guys got to pay your staff more. This is terrible writing. Well, it's not terrible. It's deliberately unclear. It's meant to be confusing so that the American public doesn't understand what's going on. I'm sorry. There's no way the New York Times is unable to just clearly articulate things, something so serious and so clear. But luckily, we're going to get to read the emails themselves. And the fascinating part is, again, that the House is set to return to session literally this week with the final vote needed to release the Epstein files coming in. Now, luckily for us, guys, House Oversight dropped the actual emails themselves. The only thing blocked out is author Michael Wolff's email. You might recall that Michael Wolff, in 2019, prior to Epstein's death, was actually writing a biography on the convicted sex trafficker, particularly around his relationship to President Donald Trump. So this is a 2019 email in which from Jeffrey Epstein's personal email account, in which he says, quote, victim name, Mar-a-Lago, blank, 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 blank. So victim name, Mar-a-Lago, period. Blank, 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 period. Trump said he asked me to resign, me being Jeffrey Epstein. Never a member ever. He means I was never actually a member of Mar-a-Lago, ... Of course, he knew about the girls being the trafficked.
Listen, I'm not, if you want to do it that way, that's fine. It's just for me, it's kind of weird, because I think there's no challenge in that. But I'd want to have somebody say that that's good, I don't want that.
He declared himself the Paganini of the electric guitar, bringing classical fury to rock and redefining virtuosity itself. Yet behind Yngwie Malmsteen's uncompromising genius and lightning-fast solos lay a brutal public contempt for his peers. There were 6 guitarists, and the styles they represent, that he openly dismissed, mocked, and simply couldn't stand. What drove this supreme musical arrogance? And why did some of the most legendary names in rock and blues end up on his amateur list? Join us as we find out the 6 guitarists Yngwie Malmsteen hated the most. Number 1, Ritchie Blackmore. What happens when the man you worship becomes the man you come to hate? For a young Yngwie Malmsteen, Ritchie Blackmore wasn't just a guitarist, he was the only guitarist. Yngwie has openly stated his obsession. He got his first Stratocaster because Blackmore played one. He burned his guitars on stage because Blackmore did.
What if your buds?
Forces have taken Pokrovsk, but the Ukrainians aren't out of the woods.
And now he's this what's up, internet? Welcome to Once Over. I'm Kaylee, and today we're giving the Once Over to SLC Punk.
Salt Lake, shitty. And we're all just barely floating along, waiting for somebody that can walk on water. I am the future of this great nation.
There will be spoilers.
Give it a good once-over.
Giving us the once-over. Giving him the once-over. Give me a once-over.
Down to give us the once-over. For a routine once-over.
Once-over.
Oh, just once over lightly.
So, SLC Punk, I love this movie so much. It is loud, funny, heartbreaking, and weirdly beautiful. It's the kind of movie that looks like it's going to be about spitting on authority and being anti-everything, but secretly it's about growing up. About realizing that maybe rebellion isn't what you thought it was. Or at least that rebellion doesn't always last forever. It starts with Matthew Lillard, Steve-O, narrating straight into the void, the blackness of the screen. This is an almost poetic rant about how much he hates rednecks and by extension, America.
Because rednecks for us, we're America incarnate. And America? Well, fuck America.
And we're off. Immediately, Steve-O and his buddy Bob are jumping rednecks with a baseball bat, and Steve-O says,
"We weren't much more than a couple of young punks."
That pretty much sets the tone of this film. It's violent, messy, a little stupid, but with total sincerity. The opening credits are great too. We get to see punk albums flashing across the screen with the names of the cast and crew members instead of the band. The adolescents play in the background, and it already feels like a love letter to a very specific subculture. One that's kind of doomed from the start, and also one that meant a lot to me. Now, I was always a metalhead growing up. I never really listened to punk, but I always enjoyed the idea of a subculture so important to the youth that it was just their everything. Their entire lives revolved around it. And that is what this movie incarnates. Steve-O and his best friend, Heroin Bob, who ironically is terrified of needles and never does drugs, are recent college graduates living in a crumbling, graffiti-covered trap house with "I voted Reagan" slathered all over the walls. They are self-proclaimed anarchists.
I'm an anarchist. I believe that there should be no rules, only chaos.
But Steve-O admits it's hard to be an anarchist in a city like Salt Lake City.
Being an anarchist in Salt Lake City was certainly no easy task.
It's like trying to set fire to a swimming pool. It just doesn't take. Heroin Bob's whole thing is that he is so punk rock that he refuses to see a doctor, even when he smashes his hand through a mirror, causing a very severe infection. He just wraps it up with a towel and goes on living his life, including going to get fast food and then passing out mid-order.
Is he gonna be okay?
When he's finally forced to go to the hospital, it is clear how much he hates doctors.
These doctors can kiss my ass!
Oh, knock it off, tough guy, or I'll give you another shot.
And the scene becomes this weirdly perfect little sketch of what punk rebellion looks like when it crashes into real life. Again, it's messy, it's dumb, but it's also kind of noble in its own stupid way. Steve-O narrates that he and Heroin Bob choose to waste their educated minds.
Bob and the rest of us had made an oath to do absolutely nothing. We were going to waste our educated minds. We had no other way of fighting. As I said, there just weren't enough of us.
They're smart, but they've decided to live like outlaws because that's what feels right for them. They could have gone to law school or med school, especially like Steve-O's dad wanted, but instead they picked anarchy. That is how they are rebelling. Steve-O's dad really wants him to go to Harvard Law School.
You have been invited to attend Harvard Law School.
His dad is this buttoned up.
You need business.
Of intense military training. I had become a Navy SEAL, joined my first SEAL team, which was SEAL Team 2 in Virginia, and I had joined my platoon, my 25-man platoon. We had gone through all this additional training at the team to prepare for deployment, and here I was 3 years to the day, almost exactly, from when I went to boot camp, getting ready to deploy as a Navy SEAL to Afghanistan. But none of that training would prepare me for how intense my first couple of weeks in Afghanistan would be. So the flight to Afghanistan is pretty routine until you enter Afghanistan airspace, when your pilots let you know, hey, you've entered Afghanistan airspace. They turn the lights to red in the inside of the plane, and they get ready to descend very rapidly into the base where we would be landing. You know, we can't afford to be in the air for any longer than we have to be because there's a risk of getting shot. So there's a super steep descent, and then they tell you to stay away from the windows, right? So you're avoiding the windows in case you get shot at. And I remember thinking like, wow, like this is really it. We're here, we're in a war zone. like we're nosediving into bases to avoid getting shot at. Like it was intense, and I'm in my 20s. Like it was just kind of cool. Then the ramp opened, the back of the plane opened, and we all got out, and we're inside of this very well fortified base. You know, we're safe in here. And immediately I was struck by the just stunning beauty of the landscape. And I remember looking out and all these snow-covered mountains. And I remember thinking, like, how is this a war zone? This is one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen. I don't think I really appreciated just how foreign of a place Afghanistan is relative to where I come from. We get out to our site, and that night they wanted to go, they being the team that we were relieving, they wanted us to go on an operation. We were going to be up in the mountains. And I remember distinctly them talking about the cave systems that were in these mountains. And I remember thinking like how creepy that was, that we would be up on these mountains, walking around. It's so isolated, it's so foreign, and there could be like people hiding in caves that we could accidentally fall into one of their caves. Like it really, really creeped me out. And so I was talking about how creepy these caves were, and the interpreter was like, you know, what's really creepy is back in 2002, there was this fairly well documented case of another special operations unit, the Army Green Berets, coming in contact with a creature in a cave, and they actually got into a battle with it, and they lost one of their soldiers to this creature. And it was fairly well documented, but then it was quickly kind of silenced. I mean, certainly the story was interesting, but I didn't really believe it. Maybe it was some animal, maybe it was some person, whatever it was, there was some explanation to it. It wasn't until now that I actually started exploring different strange occurrences and strange events, and I looked and found some testimony from one of the soldiers that came forward anonymously, who was a part of this operation where they came in contact with this creature in Kandahar. And what struck me about his testimony is it sounds authentic. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell that soldier's story, and I'm going to tell the other kind of corroborating witness stories as well, to try to give you a picture of what happened in Kandahar in 2002. And you can be the judge if you think this is fact or fiction. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you come to the right place, because that's what my channel is all about, and I upload 3 to 4 times a week. So if that interests you, I would encourage you to please gently ravage the like button and then subscribe to my channel and turn on all post notifications so you don't miss any of those 3 to 4 weekly uploads. All right, guys, let's get into the story. In 2002, an Army infantry unit just vanished. They were on patrol in the Kandahar mountain range in Afghanistan, and they stopped using the radios. They stopped calling in. No one knew what was going on. They didn't call in a TIC, which stands for Troops in Contact. Basically, any military unit, if you're out on an operation and you start getting shot at, you radio in to your higher command, hey, troops in contact, or TIC, which signals to them, you need to get aircraft on standby, you need to get ready to send reinforcements, they need to be ready to support you. But they only do that if you signal that you're in a TIC. And it's, a lot of people, if anything, will call it in too early. You know, units are known to call it in almost prematurely sometimes. And so the idea that a unit would vanish without calling in a TIC or any sort of communication about any gunfight or any ambush or anything, it's a little bit strange. And so they disappear. The Army decides that in order to find them, because this is obviously a really big deal, they would get their most elite unit, so the Army Green Berets, that's their very elite special forces, they would send them out to find this missing unit. And so one soldier that was a part of that elite special forces detachment, who just goes by Mr. K, he would come forward years later and tell the story of what happened once they were tasked with this mission. So they leave via helicopters and they fly out to the Kandahar mountain range, about 4 clicks, so 4 kilometers about, from where they believed was this infantry unit's last known location. And so they land and they start doing this fairly methodical search through the mountainside. They knew that they were in enemy territory, and at any time they could get into a gunfight, they could be ambushed. There's all these cave systems all over these mountains. And so it's slow moving to begin with. Plus they're looking for this lost infantry unit. So it's just a very slow movement through the mountains. And so over the first few days, nothing really happened. They didn't come in contact with the enemy. They didn't see any sign of this missing infantry unit. They just walked along the mountains carrying a bunch of gear, and that was it. At some point, they noticed a little bit farther ahead that there was this distinct pathway leading up the mountain and kind of around the corner. And it looked like a goat trail. You know, lots of goats that would run around the mountainside, and it looked like a very well-developed goat trail. And they decided, let's just go up there. If nothing else, we can go up onto wherever this leads us and maybe look down across the other side of the mountain and see if we can see anything. And so the team starts making their way up this goat trail. And as soon as they start making their way up, they start noticing that there are little pieces of American military equipment on the ground. There are pieces of radios, like whip antennas and housing of the actual radio itself. They found military-style backpacks as well. And they started finding pieces of uniforms that belonged to the missing infantry unit. They knew based on the patches that were on these uniforms. So as they're walking up this trail of broken equipment and uniforms, they start seeing some bone on the ground. They didn't know if it was human bone or what. They start seeing broken bones scattered on their way up to this kind of plateau. And so now the Special Forces team, I mean, they're incredibly well trained. I mean, I'm not just being biased here. I mean, the Army Green Berets, the Army Special Forces, they're very similar to the Navy SEAL teams, which I was a part of. Two different units, no doubt, but very much peers. And the level of training you get in handling situations like this one, now granted this one's pretty unique, you're so well trained that when things start getting dangerous, it's like your training just kicks in, and everybody's does. And so I would imagine that when they saw this, what they were thinking is this was an ambush. This infantry unit was ambushed, and we're probably coming up on the ambush site. And so they're, taking defensive positions, and they're moving slowly and very tactically up this mountain, and they're keeping their weapons pointed at the leading edge on their way up to the top of this mountain. They get to this plateau. It's like a flat section of the mountain, right? It's like a steep mountain, and there's like this little like shelf almost. And there's more equipment scattered and more bones scattered across it. And there's all these cave entrances right in front of them. It's as if they were intentionally placed so that they fed out onto this shelf. And so they start moving towards the mouth of the caves. And they realize, without even getting very close, that even though the mouth of these caves are pretty large and everybody could go into the cave, there is a steep drop off. Like you'd walk in and then it just goes straight down. And someone kind of peered over the edge and couldn't see how far it went down. And they decided that it was just too dangerous to go in there because clearly something happened here where American lives were lost, based on the tattered uniforms and equipment. And so let's just pull back and take up defensive positions looking at the entrance to all of these cave entrances. And so as leadership goes down kind of out of the fatal funnels, if you will, outside of these caves, Mr. K, who's the guy who's told us this whole story, he said he's looking at one of the entrances to the caves and he sees a flash of movement inside of the cave. And he looks over at it. He doesn't have time to react to it or anything. And all of a sudden a spear comes flying out of the cave, this big, massive lance comes flying out, and it goes right through one of his teammates whose name was Dan. And so Dan's down. And so the whole team saw that. They didn't see who threw it, but they certainly saw the spear hit Dan. And so as they're shocked and just keeping their weapon up, wondering what's going to happen, out runs this, by Mr. K's account, a 12 to 15 foot tall man with a red beard and red hair down past his shoulders, comes charging out, howling like a war cry. He's got animal skins for clothes. He just looks super dirty. And he runs over to Dan to pull the spear out and probably use it again. And the rest of the team at this point is broken out of their shock of what they're seeing, and they start engaging this giant. And the giant didn't really have a chance to fight back. And in 30 seconds, the giant is down too. So Dan's down and the giant is down. And the whole team is like, what just happened? So after the dust had settled and all the shooting had stopped, they went to check on Dan, and Dan had passed away. And so they called back into higher headquarters, and they're trying to describe what happened. A very large, possibly human creature threw a projectile that hit Dan. And so they sent 2 helicopters out, one to retrieve Dan and the team, the other just to hoist up this very large human-like creature because they wanted to know what it was. And they struggled mightily to get the netting around this big creature. It ended up weighing over 1,100 pounds. It had 6 toes on each foot, and it had 6 fingers on each hand. They load it up, they string it onto this helo, and it takes off. And the team gets into the other helicopter, and they go back expecting to be debriefed as soon as they get back to base. The helicopter with the Giant would fly to an airfield and they would meet up with a crew of a C-130, which is another big military aircraft. The pilot of that craft would publicly say that he remembers seeing a 12 to 15 foot tall giant person with 6 fingers on each hand, six toes on each foot. And he would say that's what he saw, even though it was later redacted and made top secret. Mr. K and his team, they flew back to the base to be debriefed. And so they had to provide an after action report. It's something done in the military. You go out, you do any operation, you come back, and you write up what happened. And so Mr. K and his team decided to just be honest about what they saw. And so they described it again in detail, 6 fingers on each hand, 6 toes on each foot. It came out, it threw the spear, it hit Dan, it's this horrible situation. And once they submitted it, their leadership said, you got to rewrite that. We're not going to accept that. So Mr. K said they ultimately rewrote it, and it just sounded like a typical engagement in the mountains with the enemy. And it was made top secret, and then they never saw it again. And that was it. Mr. K said that he and the rest of his team also had to sign non-disclosure agreements to not ever talk about what they saw. And they never got any word about what actually happened. What did they do with the body of the Giant? And they just never got any clarity out of it. It was just basically made top secret, redacted, and they were told don't talk about it. So it would take until 2016 when Mr. K finally just said, you know what, screw it. I'm going to go public with what I saw because my friend died and they're acting like, this didn't happen, but it did happen. And so that's why we have this detailed report of this mission where they came in contact with the Giant of Kandahar. I don't know how I feel about this story. I do think that if there was a place in the world that had the ability to mask or hide giants from being seen by the prying eyes of the human population, it would be Afghanistan. There were times when I was walking around out there that it felt like I was walking around on another planet. But either way, you do have one soldier who was killed by something out in the mountains of Kandahar, and his own teammates say this is what happened. And you have multiple corroborating witness testimony, but a lot of it's been made top secret and redacted, and so we don't really know what happened, or at least us commoners don't know what really happened. So I'd love to hear what you think happened, whether you think this totally happened and it's true, or if you think it was a hoax. If you enjoyed this story, if you would, please gently ravage the like button and then also subscribe to my channel and turn on all post notifications, because I post stories like this one 3 to 4 times a week. And so if that's your deal, well, then you come to the right place. That's going to do it, guys. If you want to get in touch with me, you can message me on Instagram. My handle is JohnBallin416. I'm also very active on TikTok, where my handle is Mr. Ballin, and you can reach me on there as well. That's going to do it, guys. Take care.
After he arrived at the Butler County Fairgrounds on the morning of the shooting, Thomas Crooks conducted surveillance by flying his drone over the rally site. He flew that drone for 11 minutes. It just so happened that the Secret Service's anti-drone system were down at exactly the same moment. What are the odds?
The odds are 0. 0 are the odds that is by happenstance. Well, you wake up Friday morning, think you're going to head out to jiu-jitsu open mat, and then Tucker Carlson hits you with the bombshell of bombshells. And I think this should probably be the overarching news cycle right now, okay? Now, I realize there's been an enormous document dump in the other case that we've been talking about, but this is about Thomas Crooks and what appeared to everyone with a brain to be a conspiracy to assassinate the leading candidate in the presidential election. And the fact that we knew so little about this was indicative of something much bigger just in and of itself. How do we not know more about this? And Tucker Carlson just blew the lid off of this case. And I mean that in a very, very, very literal way, okay? Literal way. How do you blow a lid off a case? I don't know if literal was exactly the right way to say that. Well, it wasn't. Take it back. Okay, I take it back. But he did a great job, okay? So what did we learn in this video? Okay, well, we learned that the FBI knew a lot about Thomas Crooks, like a lot. Okay, this guy was not some mystery. That was not true at all. That's actually a great place to start before we get into what we learned. Okay, what did we know about Thomas Crooks? Nothing. Okay, that's what I realized. We knew nothing about him. We knew that he was a kid that lived around there, that for some reason his family's house didn't seem to have silverware, you know? But I'll tell you what we learned today. This kid was very real, and he certainly is not like a make-believe person, which was kind of implied before. And he's a ghost online. Not true at all. Because Tucker got a hold of his old deactivated YouTube account. And this is a person who said a lot of things online. And as much as that probably sounds like it's going to lead to, oh, okay, well, this guy was just, here's what the guy thought. Oh, it's way deeper than that. This is a person who was planning violence for a very long time. And Tucker literally identifies the moment where he was identified by a bigger something, and then suddenly he's recruited. I mean, I think I can even say that fairly without it being explicitly said. I think I can say that confidently without feeling like I'm even moderately juicing this story up. So we're going to get into it right now. Okay. So let's start right here. Okay. Let's just hear what the FBI had said about Thomas Crooks at the time that he, right after the assassination attempt.
This to Congress just 1 month after the attempted assassination.
Something just very recently uncovered that I want to share is a social media account which is believed to be associated with the shooter in about the 2019-2020 timeframe. There were over 700 comments posted from this account. Some of these comments, if ultimately attributable to the shooter, appear to reflect anti-Semitic and anti-immigration themes, to espouse political violence, and are described as extreme in nature.
The social media account Abate was describing was Crooks's YouTube comments. When the FBI made that claim, we had to take his word for it. We have no way to check, but now we do. In September, we obtained hundreds of comments from Thomas Crooks's YouTube account.
There you go. Okay. So right out of the gate, what we're going to learn is that Thomas Crooks started as a right-wing kind of extreme guy. We'll look at some of his comments here shortly. Okay. We're also going to learn that he made an abrupt 180, like a huge 180.
Sometimes.
You all know who the Vikings and the Normans are. Well, let's see. Hey, noble ones, always a pleasure. Hello from me, Metatron. I want to show you the handle on this. Now, there are a lot of things that I really like about Norse culture and history. Obviously, I really like their armor, shields, hence I have a replica, the axes, the swords, the weapons, all of that kind of stuff. I love the saga, I love the literature, I love the language, Old Norse. But whenever you think about the Norse, and if I were to ask you what's the first thing that comes to mind, what would you say? The runes, maybe? Well, I think for a lot of people, they might say berserkers. Berserkers as a type of warrior is such a fascinating topic that I thought, you know what? I don't think I have a dedicated video, so how about we talk a little bit about them. Well, there are quite a few things that we can say about berserkers, but first of all, we need to discuss the difference between a mythical aspect of a berserker and what would have been instead a historical berserker. Often when we imagine the berserkers, we are thinking of these completely crazy warriors that go into this rage, some people say induced by substances, perhaps alcohol, perhaps mushrooms. Other people say no, they were just particularly violent and raging because of that. And maybe some people even connected to Old Norse mythology. So the idea of it's the gods, specifically one god, we'll get that to a minute, that gives them this state. Berserksangr. Anyways, savages, brutish, strong warriors that rage and run into battle. That's how we usually imagine them. Now, berserkers are absolutely mentioned in the sagas. In fact, in several sagas. Although it's important to note that the idea of berserkers consuming anything that would give them this altered state of mind, that is completely speculative. No mention whatsoever. Now, with that being said, what happens at a visual level when we write berserker, for example, on Google? We get quite a few things. The first thing I would like to address is this. Would a berserker have any connection, in fact, with bare skin? Well, to respond to this, we need to, of course, look at the etymology of the word. I'll give you a little bit of an overall idea here, but if you want to know more and you want to listen to an actual professional about it, do check the channel run by Dr. Jackson Crawford. The idea that berserkers would be wearing bare skin comes from one possible interpretation of the Old Norse word berserkr, which is singular, berserkir, plural. Serker, meaning shirt, ber, meaning either bare in the sense of the animal or bare in the sense of naked. So, bare shirt or bare of shirt, so naked of shirt. Now, the correct interpretation is indeed debated. We don't know. To add my own personal input when it comes to this, even though I'm not trained in Old Norse, but I do have experience in translation, I would say it could very much be both. I personally think that it's a play on words. And it's done on purpose. How am I going to justify that? When we read the way these berserkers are described in the sources, we will find indicators to both interpretation as being suitable. In some passages, we're told that the berserkers are in fact going to battle without wearing armor. In that case, bare of shirt would be a good interpretation. However, there is also another indicator that instead points to the idea of a connection between animal skin specifically, or animals, and the berserker, and that is the word ulfedin. Here you see that I'm writing it ulfednar because that's the plural, ulfedin singular. And this word here actually means wolf, so wolf shirt. When it comes to berserkers, sometimes they are indicated as ulfednar in the saga, depending on what you read. So it is possible that this is the exact same type of warrior.
I am a girl who loves my island. And the girl who loves
Same type of warrior. Returning for a moment to the berserkangr, so the altered state of mind, or this sort of warlike fury that takes over the mind of the berserkers. Having removed for a moment the hypothesis that sees a correlation between the ingestion of any sort of substance in order to induce it chemically into the body, and of course not discussing the mythological aspects of it, how could we explain the achieving of such a mental state by the berserkers historically? Well, let's examine it. If we pay close attention to the way it's described, this is such a fury that it can be contained by iron chains or expressed in combat. And the way this is achieved is by screaming, howling, roaring like animals, biting the rim of the shields, and sometimes even going as far as ingesting hot coal. By looking at this, I think the first causal link that we can find is that there is indeed some similitude to the sort of sometimes involuntary actions that are performed by people under stress, specifically soldiers, before a battle. Now, this can go from voluntary ones, such as screaming, yelling at your opponent, smashing your weapons against your shields to create noise, all actions that occur in order to exercise your fear and, in a way, cause fear on your opponent, puffing your chest, all the way down to the subliminal ones, the subconscious. And the ancients do tell us about this, both when it comes to the Greek soldiers, for example, before a battle. Let me tell you about these. Tertius writes about men who bite their lips and rub the heels of their feet to try and release their fear. Xenophon and Plutarch describe in details the terror that possesses the soldiers right before battle. These nonverbal cues are highly indicative of the Greek soldier's mental state here. Actions such as fidgeting, engaging in lip compression movements are all signs of self-soothing behavior due to a markedly heightened anxious state or stress. In other words, the so-called fight or flight response, which can lead to involuntary movements and dryness of the mouth. The heel rubbing is also a form of anxiety display due to the huge cognitive load the individuals were under. And in this case, body language speaks more than words, because words can be controlled, articulated, and crafted. So the way I would really describe in the most realistic way what this berserkangr would be is a more pronounced, in fact, extreme version of all these forms of rituals, subliminal and intentional, that many times warriors have performed before the moment of lethal combat, but brought to such an extreme that people tell us about it, and it even gave a name to these warriors. Imagine, for instance, the haka of the Maori warriors, the riastrad or deformation typical of Celtic warriors in Ireland, the so-called furor of the Gallic warriors, as explained by the Romans.
The delicious taste of crisp fall apples in juice form. Move over, pumpkin spice. Simply say yes to Simply.
In a museum vault, there is a sword blade forged in the year 1200, 800 years old. Despite centuries of existence, when properly maintained, that edge geometry remains intact. The stick.
Another question that we could have is, how far back in time does the concept, the tradition, the cultural idea of a berserker go? Is it proper of the Viking Age, or is it more ancient? I think the evidence points quite strongly to the idea that berserkers would have been definitely more ancient and predated the Viking period. One piece of iconography that we can discuss when it comes to this are the so-called golden horns of Gallius, made of gold in sheet, discovered in Denmark, belonging to AD 5th century. So we are in the Germanic Iron Age. If we look at the symbols and depictions on the horns, among other things, we will find two warriors who are clearly naked, but are wearing some sort of animal head. Possibly a wolf, maybe. Now, would this be berserkers? Is this a representation of an early type of berserkers? We can't know for sure. Also because on the same horns, we find mythological creatures that clearly belong to the Mediterranean world, such as centaurs and the tricephalus giant. However, we do find more precise and more easily identifiable iconography in two famous elements or archaeological digs. The Gutenstein scabbard, late 7th century, which clearly shows warriors that appear to be berserkers once again, with wolf heads and even tails. And worth of note, the fact that this scabbard was actually found in Germany. Last but not least, the Torslunda plates, made of bronze, belonging to the 6th to 8th century AD. Once again, wolf warriors. And what's fascinating about this is not only that we have got wolf-headed warriors that could well be berserkers in a continental Germanic context, but that they are represented or depicted near an image or a personage that has been interpreted being Odin. Having discussed all of this iconography, we could clearly see that there is overwhelming evidence that appears to point to the idea of a wolf-headed warrior, or a warrior wearing a wolf skin as opposed to a bear skin. With that being said, we do have an exception to this, which is the depiction on the runic stone number 56 of Kalbi, which represents instead what appears to be a warrior with the head of a bear. And Snorri, as a writer, does mention that the berserk state of mind made berserkers as strong as bears. Now, is it possible to postulate the idea that there would be a presence of something very similar to a berserker that we have in the Norse culture, but in other Germanic cultures, for instance, of continental Europe? While I believe that something similar could have absolutely happened, it is also important to be careful not to confuse mythological ideas and irrelevant statements, even if present in the sources, with berserkers of the Norse saga. What I mean by that is that, as an example, for instance, we could look at the Longobard, which are a Germanic tribe that lived and conquered several territories in Italy between 568 and 774. Paul the Deacon speaks about these warriors and even tells us about a cynocephalus monstrous warrior that would allegedly join their ranks in combat. Cynocephalus meaning dog-headed. Is this another type of warriors that, according to the writer, eat the flesh of their enemies and drink their blood? Could there be a correlation between the Cynocephalus warriors of the Longobards, as described in the sources, and their connection with animal, skin, and the
Earbuds that actually answer questions.
What's a good way to thicken sauce?
Mix 1 part cornstarch with 2 parts cold water, then stir into simmering sauce.
And how long should it simmer?
From writer-director James L. Brooks comes the perfect holiday comedy.
My body exploded in sweat.
In the sources and their connection with animal, skin, and the Berserkir of the Norse saga. Well, the reality is probably not, mostly because we do know that such warriors didn't exist. It was in fact a false rumor that was spread by the Longobards in order to instill fear in their enemies, to try and discourage them to meet them in combat. Another very interesting aspect when it comes to this is what was reported by Professor Michael Spiegel from the University of Hawaii, as he was the one who noted that in the Trajan column specifically, there is a type of warriors belonging to auxiliary troops that we could probably identify with the Quadi people who go into battle wearing bear skins and wolf skin, and they are in the iconography. Is there a correlation between these warriors that were fighting and are represented in the Trajan column and the actual Norse bear skins and wolf skin? Well, the only thing we can say is maybe, but we have no idea if this is in fact a proof of the concept of berserkers even with other Germanic people of the continent, or if it's just a coincidence. Still, the cool thing about this is that, considering the fact that these were auxilia, if there really was a correlation, then it would mean that the Romans had berserkers actually fight for them and with them, joining their ranks as auxiliary troops. It's a big statement, but it is really cool to think about. Now, regardless of how you want to call them or regardless how you imagine them, one thing is for sure. As you read the sagas, you will notice that they are almost never indicated in a positive sense. In the sense that these are not heroes. These are usually crazy men that do horrible things like going around and challenging men for their wives or daughters and then killing them. But one thing that characterizes them is their power, which is usually given to them by Odin. In other words, the fact that these warriors would be invulnerable against iron and steel and fire. So, you try to burn them, you try to stab them, not gonna work. And this is thanks to Odin, at least from the perspective of the Norse, or from the Christian perspective, which we also get as we read monks telling us about the Berserkir, it's witchcraft. And there is this really cool passage that I wasn't aware of, but Dr. Crawford actually mentions in one of his videos, where a monk tells us that fire doesn't work against berserkers because of this witchcraft, but then again, if the fire is blessed in the name of Christ, then it does actually end up working against the berserkers. And that was, of course, the perspective of a medieval Christian that is telling us the Christian God is more powerful than the Norse God. Interestingly enough, which may be worth of note, the fact that oftentimes berserkers, when described in the sagas, are connected with number 12. When they arrive, they do so in a group of 12. Moreover, another characteristic of berserkers in the sagas is that they are oftentimes foreign, in the sense that if said saga was written in Norway, then berserkers tend to be from Sweden. And if the saga was written in Iceland, then they may be from Norway, and so on and so forth. Alright, noble ones, but I hope that you enjoyed this video on my opinions and interpretations when it comes to the berserkers, but let me know what you think in the comments below. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Goodbye.
Have you ever heard of the berserkers, the legendary Norse warriors who fought with a terrifying animalistic fury? But what if I told you the truth behind these legends is far stranger, more
Popular.
You know, they're humanoid, I guess, but there's something about them that is frightening, you know, to your core. And when you walk into the room, and you know you're walking into someplace horrible.
The world keeps lying, but he won't retreat on his quest for truth.
Yeah.
Truth, quest for truth. They can't stop me, they can't block me. Moving through, got that fire, they can't buy me. Quest for truth, breaking chains, making waves. That's what I do. When they hate, I create.
They don't hand out top secret security badges in Silicon Valley as party favors. My guest tonight says he spent years inside the machine. He claims the projects weren't just about faster chips and smarter ads, but about punching the hole straight through the veil between here and, well, everywhere else. Credentials, uncheckable. The guy's a ghost. But even if there's only a chance it could be true, I still want to hear it.
Way back when the QAnon thing came up, I had fled Silicon Valley and was never going to talk about anything because first of all, I didn't think anybody would ever believe me, the things that I've seen. And I didn't really want to think about it anymore. But I was watching Dr. Jerome Corsi on I think it was called the Patriot Soapbox or something. And they were talking about a lot of the things that I was trying to avoid. I was very surprised that they were talking about certain rituals and such that have kind of gone mainstream at this point, which is surprising. So I had a picture that I sent to him, and it was a picture of Obama with all the tech titans of the time sitting around a table toasting. Everybody assumed that was Obama's table. It wasn't. It was Larry Ellison's table. If you look at the body language and study the picture a little bit, it's Larry Ellison's meeting, and what they were toasting was the alliance that they had made between the DC, what I call the Lucy's, the DC Lucy's, and the technology Lucy's.
What brought you to Silicon Valley?
Well, I like to say I sort of Forrest Gumped my way there. I'd always had an affinity for math and physics, and I really wanted to study math and physics. I started at the local city college, which was Monterey Peninsula College. And some of my professors said, you're going to end up being a professor, so you might as well pick a different discipline to study. So I thought, okay, mechanical engineering. I love building stuff. And then I got accepted into Cal Poly, sort of a roundabout way, and got into computer science. And once I got into computer science, now you have to remember, this is back in the 80s. And Silicon Valley and the tech industry was very young. It's a lot different than it is now. They were just starting out. We were still the geeks in the basement. And when I got to Silicon Valley, I was surprised at what was going on, very surprised. Had no idea some of the things they were doing to get power and position. I mean, they were willing to do anything. Now, a lot of people call them Satanists. I don't, because there's a lot of Satanists there, but they don't consider themselves Satan. I call them Lucy's for lack of better. Some people call them the Illuminati. Some people call them other things. I just refer to them as the Lucy's. It's the Luciferian elites. And these people are crazy. They do some crazy things, and look where they are today. It worked. It worked for them. And this isn't new. Technology isn't new. The Luciferians aren't new. This is a long time coming. This has been going on for thousands of years.
Yeah, I've heard from several people that are in that arena that they take large amounts of drugs basically and try to commune with entities, and that to me really makes a lot of sense when we see some of the technology that's coming out.
Yeah, drugs are a big part. A lot of ecstasy, a lot of cocaine. I mean, the routine is you take ecstasy to get things going, and then you take cocaine to keep it going, and then when everything's done, you want to go home, go to bed. You take Valium to go to bed. But some of these party. They could last days, days. And like I said, so it's hard to think back. I consider myself a different person now, but that part of me is still there. There's no way I can get rid of it, except prayer.
They have no idea who they're dealing with.
I would imagine that being in Silicon Valley, when did you start realizing that things weren't exactly what you thought they would be when you...
Welcome in, everyone. I hope you guys are doing great wherever you're watching from today. We have a mysterious situation that is unfolding in Venezuela as a series of attacks or explosions were carried out, and we honestly do not quite know just yet, as of me filming this, what the hell is going on. The Venezuelans are claiming it was a massive terror attack. The United States has not said anything. So we're going to break down what exactly happened, what we know, and keep in mind the United States government has warned people to be on the lookout for a false flag attack. So I'm filming this on November 16th. All information is up to date as of November 16th. This is a wild situation. So I'm going to need everyone to just hang tight.
Most conspiracies are total bullcrap. As somebody who got into this genre back in the late 90s, I can say that I've almost put 30 years into this niche topic. And I've watched it and seen it change, at least the online culture of conspiracy theories. And that gives me, I think, a unique perspective. And also, as we saw in the previous video, not bragging, not tooting horns, but I have spent the last 25 years with my nose in a book. With that information and education, I think it gives me a pretty good perspective to talk about the uselessness of most conspiracy theories. So it was a little bit of a tricky title because obviously I don't think that they're all false. But many of the major ones that pop up and become kind of a fad for a while and then die away are actually worthless or perhaps even disinformation and put out on purpose to discredit. We know that many years ago, Cass Sunstein, who was a czar under Obama, put out a paper talking about cognitive infiltration, which was the principle that that administration would utilize to create and disseminate ridiculous and fake conspiracy theories. And the reason that they would do this was to disrupt any real legitimate discussion that was going on. Oddly enough, that paper admitted at the beginning that the JFK situation was a real conspiracy. It admitted that other events like fake flag events do occur. And this again happened under the watch of Obama. My wife, Michelle, is definitely not Mike. Big Mike is definitely Michelle. Okay, let's not get too deep into it because that's just how it is. And I was born in whatever country you need me to be born in. In the case of the Big O, also I think a lot of that was kind of silly. Not that I discount all conspiracies around Barack. I think the most likely one is that his family, his mom, had a CIA pedigree. That one I think is legit. The rest of it, who knows? But the element that most people don't understand about conspiracy theories, that's the element that's so important, is that the government, the establishment, and intelligence agencies absolutely love conspiracy theories. You would think, wait a minute, that's against them. Why would they love this? Why would they be interested in supporting these kinds of anti-establishment narratives? Well, the power structure is obsessed with all ideas and all ideologies, especially our Atlanticist oligarchical elite power structure. They're interested in the effects of any belief system or any new ideology.
What if your buds could turn a public place into a
system or any new ideology in any sphere? So if a conspiracy theory, for example, could contribute to the downfall of a leader that is not amenable to the West or to the CIA or to the US, then conspiracy theories provide fertile ground for fomenting social unrest and regime change. And in fact, if you look at the color revolutions, most of the color revolution propaganda technology utilizes some form of conspiracy theory, some form of anti-fascist action, some form of democratic activism against the regime or the system. So as you can see, conspiracy theories can actually be a kind of trafficked ideology. As I said, most conspiracy theories, especially if we go back to like the 80s and the 90s, you had in the US, PatCon, and this was the Patriot conspiracy idea that the establishment essentially utilized a lot of fake prepper, sort of pre-Ron Paul era people to push a bunch of bogus nonsense like United Nations body bags type conspiracies, economic collapse, martial law kind of stuff in the 80s and 90s. Not to say that there's no possibility of there ever being a kind of martial law scenario, but the sensationalism and the hype that was very popular back at that time as the internet was actually coming into existence, it kind of died out, and it gave rise to what I would call the boomer Gen X era of conspiracy theories, particularly in the online world of hackers and cyberpunks. This is the UFO and JFK era. As the internet became omnipresent throughout the late 90s and into the 2000s, the conspiracy world shifted and grew. It turned into something more focused on, at least in the 2000s, the big events like the Big 9 event. This movement, which at one point included quite a bit of intellectual prowess across many nations in the West and even outside of the West, and to a degree even transcended conservative left-right boundaries. But it was eventually diffused partly through the tactics and techniques that Cass Sunstein talked about intentionally diffusing, the Big 9 stuff, and through politicizing it and turning it back into a party thing. So if you questioned the Big 9 event, well, you must be a Democrat associated with, I don't know who, Obama or somebody. If you must not be conservative. So they immediately turned it into a left-right thing. But that was back when the left-right thing had a lot more power and control than it does now. It still has a lot of power and control, the uniparty system, but it's less powerful than it used to be. But we saw, for example, whenever there was a big scandal or a big issue, like when Julian Assange and WikiLeaks came about, or when Edward Snowden came out talking about PRISM and the NSA spying, there were immediately floods of counter-conspiracy narratives that would pop up right away. Oh, Snowden is himself CIA. Oh, Assange is himself CIA. That's why he's talking about this. And what ended up being the case after many years, as we reflect, probably they weren't. Probably they were actually legitimate whistleblowers and legitimate opposition to the system, even if they didn't do everything that well or as we would have liked. For example, I think Assange made some huge failures in trying to appeal to some sort of generic leftist base by touting and supporting, I don't even remember, Peter Singer, the guy who believes in heavy petting. I mean, if that's the ethics that...
We're going to be married at first sight. I do.
It's a corny analogy, but I'm going to use it anyway. How I escaped the Matrix. And I'm going to tell you, as a general outline, what might work for you. Obviously, my exact pattern and plan won't work for everybody, but certain parts of it might work for you. First, get an OF page. 2, put yogurt pants on. Take pictures of yourself in various poses with the yogurt pants. I'm not even going to tell you what yogurt pants are. You're going to have to find that out the hard way. I'm just kidding. Don't put on yogurt pants. First, how to break free from the system. You have to want to. So there are things that are going to hold you back. Let's start there. When I was in my 20s, I was extremely devoted to studying religious theology, church fathers, philosophy, patristics. And I was so dedicated to this that it was all I thought about. I had a job where I worked 40, 45 hours a week, and it afforded me a lot of time to read. So all I did for about 10 years at this specific job was read a lot of those books. Now, I'm not knocking that, but I was even kind of unknowingly imbalanced in the way that I approach these things. So I would have a lot of people telling me, you need to be more practical. And I was going to college at the same time. So in my mind, it was still practical. And I would date girls here and there. I was at one point moving pretty close to getting married at that time in my 20s. And, but I was still way out of balance and I didn't even realize it. When I was a teenager, I was kind of a wild party dude. And I always had the mindset that I would love to do media. I would love to do something involving entertainment, something involving, being on the stage or whatever. I just got a lot of enjoyment out of that. It was a lot of fun. It always has been. It still is. But by the time I got into my 20s and when I was in college, I threw away all of that. I thought, no, I don't want to do any of that. I got to be a serious-minded, philosophical, academic student. And I really wanted to do something kind of in a professorial way with theology or THD or something like that. And I immersed myself in that world and in academia for most of my 20s. And again, there were some pros to that. But initially, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to try to do other things and try to maybe even do work or business. But I was offered the ability to have my college paid for. So I opted to go ahead and do that. And I think that if I hadn't, it would have been.
Domino's specialty pizzas are, oh, you're not even listening. You're staring at that. No.
Okay, look, it's speculation. You're not allowed to speculate. It's facts and logic. In fact, we've speculated and we found ourselves through speculation to be absolutely innocent of any wrongdoing. It's just crazy. It's just conspiracy theories. If you speculate, speculation to speculate about speculations, point 3.4 in the Talmud. Okay, speculations are completely bogus. And if you follow speculations, then you're probably conspiracy theorists like Alex Jones or whatever. But we've investigated ourselves and we found ourselves to be completely free, just like investigations of the Big 9 event, free of all.
Are we early or late to this party? As both a civilization and in terms of the emergence of life, is evidence of what happened on Earth a signal that life is easy because we came very early?
When you look at the history of the Earth, it seems like life started extraordinarily early. So the oceans probably formed about 4.4 billion years ago, and just 200 million years after, you have the earliest evidence for life on this planet. It probably even started, of course, even sooner than that. So that's extraordinarily quickly. It seems to happen as quickly as it possibly could, and that does give me optimism that at least if you had the identical conditions, which is a big caveat, we don't know if those conditions are everywhere, but if you had the identical conditions and you reran the experiment, yeah, I think you probably would end up with repeats of this success.
I think I subscribe to the whole thing that all these aliens coming back are actually people from the future.
Ooh.
There is an argument as well that technology so advanced would be difficult for us to detect. I mean, we tend to think of as Starship that you can see the signature of. But actually, maybe the civilization just becomes a nano civilization because that's more efficient.
A huge. I've been reporting on Wes Watson's relapse and the way he's like descending and spiraling into insanity while he's on his way to possibly doing 25 years in prison. Like, in as much as I think that this dude blows goats for scamming people out of their money and treating people the way that he does, especially and particularly women, it's sad to see somebody crash out this hard and descend into like bad substance use. You can see right here, he's got white shit all over his nose, like he been sniffing something. He swears that that's just dried up women's bodily fluids that's on his face, but he's lost so much weight. Now he's literally hanging out with these two dudes, Jack Doherty and some island boy motherfucker. Even just 3 months ago, dude had so much more muscle mass and he was so much bigger. And now, like, compared to Jack Doherty and this island boy that probably weighs like 80 pounds, he doesn't look that big, homie. And it was only a few nights ago that he was kicking it with Jack Doherty and they were all hanging out. And now Jack Doherty just got arrested. And it was on some amphetamine charges and
Scientists use GPS technology to map Jesus' exact path to the cross. 650 yards, every single step. What they discovered will absolutely wreck you. From the Praetorium to Golgotha. Archaeologists traced the precise route through ancient Jerusalem. But it's not just where he walked. Step 127. He crossed over ancient Jewish ritual cleansing pools, his blood dripping into purification water. The ultimate cleansing wasn't the ritual, it was his blood. Step 284. He passed through the court of the Gentiles, the place where all nations gathered, carrying the cross that would save all nations. Step 387. He fell on the exact spot where Abraham almost sacrificed Isaac 2,000 years earlier. Same mountain, same altar. The ram caught in thorns, he was the ram. Every step fulfilled prophecy. Isaiah 53, Psalm 22, Zechariah 13. His footprints weren't random. They were writing scripture on the stones of Jerusalem. 650 yards, 12 prophetic locations, one path. Every step mapped by God before the foundation of the world. He didn't just carry a cross. He walked out your salvation. GPS verified.
Science. Does your Allah, does he love all Christians?
Allah loves the good people. Allah doesn't love the transgressors. Allah doesn't love the disbelievers. If they don't believe in Allah, why would Allah love them?
Does Allah love the Jews?
If you
Errol Musk, Elon Musk's dad.
Ancient Sumerians are trying to give you a message through their stonework that they left behind. But because we can't read symbolism, we can't read their messages that they were trying to give to future humanity. No man ever picked up a lion. This is symbolism. The ancients spoke in symbolism, and they hoped that you could read the language so you could learn from their ancient wisdom. This is a lion representing the lower animalistic self. That's why he's fighting the lion. It represents the inner conflict between your mind, your soul, and your ego. It is the inner conflict, the person that says inside of you, go do something bad or go to scroll on TikTok. Or there's another voice inside of you, go and read, go and figure something out, go and create something, go and learn about yourself. There's always...
Did you guys know that Ted DiBiase...
The soldier who stabbed Jesus, his name was Longinus, and he's in your church. John 19:34. A centurion stabbed Jesus' side. Blood and water poured out. Onto his face. Ancient texts say Longinus was nearly blind. The blood that hit his eyes healed him instantly. Tradition says he looked up at Jesus, saw clearly for the first time and said, "Truly, this was the Son of God." Matthew 27:54. He quit the Roman army that day, became a monk, spent 38 years telling everyone about the man he killed. Church history. He was martyred for refusing to stop preaching about Jesus. They beheaded him. The man who pierced Jesus' side died protecting Jesus' name. That's the power of one drop of blood. The soldier who stabbed Jesus, his name was Longinus, and he's in your church. John 19:34.
These wrestlers eat. You can't break them.
Is that you choose to become an
Alcohol? Me.
All right.
If God just needed Jesus to die for...
Wait, please, don't go.
The crown of thorns had...
And by the way...
Did you know there are...
People don't tell you who they are. They show you with their behavior.
Did you know...
People don't tell you who they are. They show you with their behavior. Anyone can say the right thing Anyone can make promises, post cute quotes, apologize like a pro, but behavior, that's the real truth. Behavior doesn't lie. Pay attention to how people treat you when they don't need anything from you. Pay attention to whether their actions match their stories. Pay attention to what they do after they disappoint you, not what they say about it. Talk is always temporary, but the patterns, the behaviors, those are permanent.
How much does wrestling stay?
But the patterns.
Nothing. Like I said.
Do you know who was the first man to sell his soul to the devil? He wasn't a witch, nor a sinner, but a priest. His name was Theophilus of Adana, a man known for his faith, humility, and devotion. But envy can corrupt even the purest heart. Many years ago, he was offered the title of bishop, a position of great honor. Out of modesty, he refused, but that same honor was given to his rival instead. Once in power, his rival used his authority to humiliate and disgrace him over and over again. In his anger and despair, Theophilus began to question his faith, and that's when the devil appeared. No fire, no chains, just a tempting whisper. I can give you everything you've lost. All you have to do is sign your name and give me your soul. Blinded by rage, he agreed. In an instant, he gained the power he had long desired, but lost the peace of his soul. Glory turned to emptiness, and triumph became torment. Overcome with remorse, he knelt before the Virgin Mary, begging for forgiveness, fasting and praying for 30 days, until one day, an angel descended, tore apart the demonic pact, and declared his soul redeemed. Tears streamed down his face as he whispered his final prayer. And in that moment of peace, his soul was set free. It's said that on silent nights, his cries can still be heard echoing through old cathedrals, a warning to all mankind. Never let power or envy be the price you pay for your faith. Tell me, if it were you, could you resist such temptation? Do you know who would...
I just found out this morning that I am on an Antifa hit list.
Apparently, this sound suits every... How come all the scary guys are the nice ones?
If you were
How come all the scary guys are the nice ones?
If you are intimately familiar with violence and you are capable of violence, the less you have to prove and the less amount of violence you have to do to ever be successful at anything. But you're 100% right. These monsters out there are the nicest people on the planet.
Yeah.
And it's because they're capable of doing so much. Jordan Peterson.
We have to love others despite.
One, there's a type of guys that kill. One, there's a type of guys that kill people and just get away with it. They're waiting for you. When you leave work, you are fucked. Like, enjoy your last day working. The waiters were basically telling me that I was dead meat, that they were gonna get me outside and torture me to death. So, naturally, one, there's a type of guys that kill people and just get away with it. They're waiting for you. When you leave work, you are fucked. Like, enjoy your last day working. The waiters were basically telling me that I was dead meat, that they were gonna.
Did the band Liliac just straight up?
I'm gonna say this, and
Are we in the end times?
I think we're in the end of this age of disobedience. I don't think it's the end of the world. I'm pretty sure in Revelation it talks about 1,000-year peace, and I think we would have noticed that if that happened. I'm pretty sure it didn't happen. And there's theologians that say, oh, it's metaphorical, they don't look for 1,000-year peace. Well, you know what? Were you there when he created everything? No. So, like, it could be true. Maybe there will be an actual 1,000 years of real peace that only can come down from heaven. But in the process, we're living in a very, like you said, it's dark. The rulers of this world have an allegiance to Satan. There's a propensity for destruction.
Are we in the end time?
I'm gonna say this, and I'm gonna say it one time, and I ain't gonna repeat myself, but I'm gonna make myself loud and clear. The people that bounce back from everything that was sent and meant to destroy.
Are we in the end?
Friends, is this... Told people, do not.
You need to watch this.
My name is Tabassum Khurshid. I was born in England
in 1971 to Pakistan. After school, every evening, we used to have to go to masjid, to learn how to read the Quran. They never once explained what we were reading. By the age of 11, I had been able to read the entire Quran in Arabic. I didn't understand what I'd read. When I was 23 years old, my parents took me to do Umrah in Saudi Arabia. My mum said to me beforehand, the first time you see Kaaba with your eyes, you will have an experience with God. The first time I saw Kaaba, I actually did have an experience with God. I heard a voice, and the voice said, I am Alpha, I am Omega, I am the beginning, I am the end. I knew straight away that this is not from Islam, and this is not from the Quran, and this is not Allah, because Allah only speaks Arabic. At age 35, I managed to get hold of a copy of the Quran in English. When I read the Quran, I couldn't make head or tail of it. I found it so disjointed. I found it incoherent. At that same time, my mother just happened to mention in passing about Aisha, who Muhammad married when she was 6 years old. And I said, how can she be his wife? She's 6 years old. Oh, no, in those days it was allowed. Cry out to God and I say, look, who are you? God, I know you exist. Please tell me the truth. I need to know who you are. Exactly 1 week later, I had a dream. I saw the end of the world. A man on the beach, and he was giving a final sermon. He said, please don't die without Jesus Christ in your life. At the age of 46, the house that I moved to, directly opposite my house, was a little Christian evangelical church. When I walked into that church, straight away,
in 24 hours, Jesus fulfilled 30 ancient prophecies written 400 to 1,000 years before he was born. Mathematicians say this is impossible, but it happened. Imagine someone predicting the exact day you'd be born, where you'd die, how much you'd be betrayed for, what you'd say in your final moments, 1,000 years before you existed. Mathematician Peter Stoner calculated the odds, fulfilling just 8 prophecies by chance, 1 in 100 quadrillion. Jesus fulfilled 30 in one day. The probability? 1 in 10 to the 157th power. That number has more zeros than atoms in the entire universe. It's not just unlikely, it's statistically impossible, unless it was planned before time began. Every lash he took, prophesied in Isaiah 700 years earlier. The 30 silver coins, written in Zechariah 500 years before Judas was born. Even the words he'd say dying, Psalm 22, written 1,000 years prior. He didn't just happen to fulfill prophecy, he knew every word written about him, and he walked into every single one, because every prophecy had your name on it. 30 prophecies, 24 hours, impossible odds, but he did it anyway. The math proves it wasn't random. The prophecies prove it was planned. The cross proves it was for you. You can deny the math. You can question the prophecies, but you can't deny someone loved you enough to fulfill the impossible. That's not.
The married ones are thinking.
The Bible predicts that there are going to be 2 witnesses.
The married ones are thinking of divorce, while the unmarried ones wish to be married. The unknown crave fame, while the famous just want privacy. The young want to grow old, while the old wish they could turn back time. The poor want to become rich, and the rich spend their nights wishing for the peace they lost, chasing wealth. The ones who got what they wanted now want something else. Because wanting isn't about having, it's about chasing. The second something is yours, it loses its shine. No one actually wants it all, they just want to stop feeling like they chose wrong. And that's the only real choice. It's not about being satisfied with what you have or settling for less, but about choosing what you're willing to live with and what you're willing to let go of.
The Bible predicts that there are going to be 2 witnesses who preach that
the whole Bible is talking about the things that's going on in between these 2
humanity.
So you're calling me stupid?
Basically.
Scientists recreated what Jesus saw in his final seconds. When you see it, you'll break. From the cross, looking down, he would have seen his mother Mary, John, and the women weeping. But medical research shows at that angle, with head bowed, he would have seen his own hands nailed to the wood. The last visual his eyes processed, the nails, the blood, the hands that created the universe, destroyed for you. John 20.
I ain't saying nothing.
When people think of you as the nice one, you probably feel good about it. You listen patiently, stay away from arguments, and help others even when you're overwhelmed yourself. The world takes advantage of nice people, not because everyone is cruel, but because you've shown them exactly how to treat you. You've taught people to expect you to sacrifice while teaching yourself to ignore your own needs. Without boundaries, people will simply take up all the space you offer them. Your value isn't based on what you can do for other people. You were worthy of love and attention, even before you knew how to be helped.
So this is my encouragement to you as you're seeking God's will in your life. So this is my encouragement to you as you're seeking God's will in your life. Ask him. This is the right thing to do. Seek God's will constantly. Ask him for guidance. And you'll find, most of the time you seek, you find, you knock, the door's open to you. If he doesn't answer, consider that it may be his will that you not know at this moment. He wants you to persevere. He wants you to trust him with the details of your life, that he'll show you what to do at the right time. You'll know that also because you'll have a sense of peace. It's like the Lord's patting you on the hand when you struggle to that point. He's patting you, he's saying, son, trust me. I'm not going to answer the question you're asking right now. It's not a good time for you. If you approach the pursuit of God's will for your life, this is the path to knowing it and having the certainty that what you're doing is your Father in heaven's will for your life.
Cast. Do you know?
Can you repeat that?
Do you know who the angel was that stayed by Jesus' side when he was bound to the cross and faced his trial? According to the scriptures, that night, heaven and earth fell silent, the winds ceased, and even the stars dimmed their light. In the Garden of Gethsemane, before he was arrested, Jesus knelt alone on the ground. His body trembled, and drops of blood and sweat fell to the earth, not from fear, but from the unbearable weight of humanity's sin. He lifted his eyes toward heaven and prayed with a trembling voice, Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me, yet not my will, but yours be done. And in that moment, the entire universe seemed to hold its breath. Then, a light descended from heaven. An angel appeared before him, carrying no sword, no thunder, no crown of glory. He did not stop Judas's betrayal, nor did he remove the cross from Jesus's path. He simply knelt beside the Savior, offering divine tenderness and the strength to endure what was to come. He did not come to spare Jesus from suffering, but to give him the power to complete his mission of redemption. That night, Jesus still walked toward the cross, but he was no longer alone, for the kingdom of heaven was with him. And perhaps that is the deepest truth of faith. God may not always shield you from pain, but he will send an angel to stand beside you in your lonely.
Can you repeat that? Because I want people to understand.
When we die, we're going to go to the grave. We will take nothing with us. Nothing.
Some people in your life will get angry when they realize they can't control you anymore. They don't like that you now speak up for yourself. They hate that you can say no. They are bothered by the fact that you are no longer
That's really the main criticism I've had all the way back to when we had our papacy debate. Like, I've never had a personal issue with him. I'm not jealous. I'm not like trying to ankle bite. I'm happy to, you know, if he never wants to speak to me again, that's fine. That's his prerogative. We don't have to ever speak. But my only point has been the same point I made 10 years ago. Is like, if you want to have a real movement that's going to have, you know, real change, it's not mainly going to be political. You've got to give people, and young men especially, a plan of action to have healing and to get grounded in.
The iconic taste of Ferrero Rocher, now in a square. Raise a Rocher.
Diagnosed with Crohn's disease and struggling with your symptoms, it's not too soon to talk to your doctor about Entyvio.
Baal. This was the Canaanite god of storms, rain, and fertility. Basically the weather guy in the pagan pantheon. Since agricultural life depended on rain, people believed Baal controlled the harvest, livestock, and even human fertility. The result? His worship spread fast and even contaminated the people of Israel, who lived surrounded by nations that worshipped him. Worshipping Baal involves some dark stuff. We're talking cultic prostitution, frenzied dancing, self-harm rituals, and in some cases, human sacrifice. It wasn't just a different religion, it was idolatry that dehumanized people, twisted sexuality, killed the innocent, and replaced God with demons. That's why Elijah, on Mount Carmel, staged that epic confrontation to prove that only the Lord is God. Asherah, she was a mother goddess, tied to fertility, sexuality, and the life force of nature. She was considered the wife of El, an elderly god said to have created the world and all living beings. Her worship took place under trees, with sacred poles set up on high hills, forests, and mountaintops. Sounds scenic? Maybe. But what happened there was much darker than it looked. Rituals dedicated to Asherah were drenched in sexual immorality, cult prostitution, and religious sensuality. It was an attempt to manipulate the gods through pleasure, as if human lust could force divine blessing. Priestesses would sleep with men who sought them out in hopes of blessing their crops. It was basically holiness exchanged for sensuality dressed up as spirituality. The worst part? And he set a graven image of the goddess Asherah that he had made in the house. Yes, King Manasseh placed an idol of Asherah in God's temple, a terrible act, and God made it clear he would not tolerate this syncretism. You can't worship the Holy One of Israel and at the same time bow to a deity that glorifies human lust. Molech, one of the darkest false gods in the Old Testament, though some believe Molech might have been another name for Baal. What we know for sure, Molech demanded the most horrific kind of sacrifice: children. Yes, living children burned in fire. It was worship that literally smelled like death. In Leviticus 18:21, God commands, "And thou shalt not let any of thy seed pass through the fire to Molech." And in Jeremiah 7:31 he says, "Which I commanded them not, neither came it into my heart." Molech's most famous image was a metal statue with outstretched arms and a burning furnace inside. Priests would place babies into the fire as offerings. Loud drums would beat to drown out the screams. It's horrifying, but it happened. And the scariest part? Even God's own people in Jerusalem got swept up in this madness. King Ahaz himself sacrificed his own son to this false god. Dagon was the Philistine god. And yes, he had the form of a fish. Half man, half fish. Think of a regional bootleg Poseidon. He was considered the lord of grain and fertility, and had temples in major Philistine cities like Ashdod. To the Philistines, he was basically a symbol of national pride. But one day, he fell, literally. When the Philistines captured the Ark of the Covenant, they placed it in Dagon's temple, like a war trophy. But the next day, when they came to check, Dagon had fallen face down in the dirt before the Ark. In other words, the true God humiliated Dagon, right in his own house. Dagon's final humiliation came when Samson, blind and chained, was brought to the temple to be mocked. With thousands gathered in worship, Samson prayed, regained his strength, and brought the whole temple down with his bare hands. The fish god was crushed beneath the ruins of his own sanctuary, along with his worshippers. Golden calf.
You can get deals on gifts all season long, but they don't have to know that.
Hey besties! As you've probably heard, support for Windows 10 has ended. It made me realize my old laptop.
First fake god crafted by the people of God themselves. And it happened in one of the most embarrassing and tragic moments in Israel's history. Moses goes up the mountain to receive God's law. Takes a little too long, and the people panic. They melt their gold, mold a calf, and say, "These be thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt." Yep, they traded the Almighty God for a shiny cow. The image was familiar. Egyptians worshipped bull-shaped gods like Apis, associated with fertility, strength, and the underworld. So the people mixed their past, their fear, and a bit of spirituality, and invented a god in their own image. The irony is off the charts. While Moses was literally receiving the 10 Commandments, including, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me," and "Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image," the people were down below breaking both, in record time, with music, dancing, and a fully twisted worship service, Nehushtan. This was the bronze serpent Moses made in the wilderness, under God's command. The people were being attacked by venomous snakes as judgment for their sins, and God told Moses to craft a bronze serpent. Anyone who looked at it in faith was healed. It became a powerful symbol of salvation, and Jesus himself would later point to it as a sign of his own mission. But what was meant to be a symbol became an idol. The people kept the serpent for generations, and instead of seeing the God who saved them, they began to burn incense to the bronze snake itself. They turned a holy object into a mystical charm. So, in the days of King Hezekiah, he had to destroy it, call it Nehushtan, just a piece of bronze, and put an end to the idolatry, Beelzebub. This name comes from Baal-zebub, which literally means Lord of the Flies, a deity worshipped in the Philistine city of Ekron. The title likely referred to controlling disease or plagues, but think about it. What kind of god takes pride in ruling over filthy insects? It's no wonder the Israelites mocked the name. They even changed the suffix from Baal-zebul, meaning exalted Lord, to Baal-zebub, more like Baal the Rotten. Over time, the name Beelzebub evolved and came to be associated with the very prince of demons. In the New Testament, the Pharisees accused Jesus of casting out demons by the power of Beelzebub, the prince of devils. So this figure became basically synonymous with Satan, or at least a high-ranking demonic power. The irony, these religious leaders were so spiritually blind, they saw the Holy Spirit in action and called it Beelzebub. That's why Jesus delivered his chilling warning about blasphemy against the Spirit, the unforgivable sin. In other words, being ignorant about Jesus is one thing, but witnessing God's power firsthand and calling it demonic, that's something else entirely. Chemosh. This was the national god of the Moabites, descendants from the incest of Lot and his daughters. And Chemosh was basically their official spiritual mascot. He was seen as a god of war and destruction, quite similar to Molech in some ways. That's because worship to Chemosh also involved human sacrifices, even of children, especially during times of crisis. Yep, the people believed that if they offered what was most valuable to them, their god would act. One of the most shocking episodes in the Bible involving Chemosh happens in 2 Kings 3. When the king of Moab was surrounded and on the brink of losing the war to Israel, he took his eldest son and sacrificed him on top of the city wall. The message was clear. As a last resort, appeal to his God with the greatest offering possible, a human life. And believe it or not, Israel flirted with Chemosh too. Solomon, later in life, influenced by his foreign wives, built an altar to Chemosh in Jerusalem, a massive betrayal of the God of Israel. It took centuries before King Josiah finally tore down that altar and cleaned house. Tammuz. This was a Mesopotamian deity linked to fertility, vegetation, and the cycle of the seasons. His story was basically a tragic soap opera. Every year, the young god would die, representing drought or winter, and people would mourn until he was reborn in the spring. A ridiculous pagan drama. Now here's the heartbreaking part. In Ezekiel 8:14, God shows a vision where women of Israel are weeping for Tammuz at the entrance of the temple. Yes, the Lord's temple. Instead of mourning their own sins, they were crying over a false god, one that merely symbolized the natural cycle, not salvation. It was emotion without repentance, idolatry dressed up as spirituality. Queen of Heaven. This so-called Queen of Heaven appears in Jeremiah chapter 7 and 44. And God makes it very clear. He detests this worship. She was a goddess worshipped especially in Mesopotamia and later in Canaan, most likely a version of Ishtar, Astarte, or Inanna. This goddess was the full package of idolatry. Mother of all, Lady of Heaven, sex, fertility, love, and war, all in one. People baked cakes for her, burned incense, held family rituals, and even claimed that everything went well when they did those things. But when they stopped, problems came. In their own words, "But since we ceased to burn incense to the Queen of Heaven and to pour out drink offerings unto her, we have wanted all things and have been consumed by the sword and by the famine." This cult was mostly led by women, but the men knew about it and approved. It was a family affair, organized and deeply rooted in a false spirituality, one centered on feelings, nature, and maternal protection. But that robbed God of his glory. Mammon. Now this one isn't exactly a god with temples and statues, which makes him different from all the others, but he might have more worshippers today than any of them. In Matthew 6:24, Jesus says, "Ye cannot serve God and mammon." In other words, money or wealth can become a master, a direct rival to God. And it's not just about having money. It's when money has you. When your decisions, priorities, and even your faith revolve around wealth, comfort, and financial security. Mammon is dangerous because he promises exactly what so many people crave: control, power, independence. He makes you think you're in charge, but he's the one pulling the strings. He offers you the world and takes your soul. That's why Jesus calls it a master, and because if you live for it, it's what rules you. In practice, worshiping mammon means putting money at the center, and that can even happen inside church. When worship turns into a means to gain prosperity, when the tithe is treated like an investment, when being blessed becomes synonymous with getting rich, at that point, mammon has already walked into the sanctuary and sat on the throne. Bel.
If you break her flow, she will never ship the agent that turns meetings that could have been emails into emails.
I need her to pull SOC 2 evidence today.
Let's use Vanta.
One of the titles of Marduk, the chief god of Babylon. He was the big boss of the Babylonian pantheon, lord of the sky, order, and civilization. In the myth, he defeats chaos, personified as the goddess Tiamat, and becomes ruler of the universe. To the Babylonians, he was a proud symbol of power, culture, and imperial success. But when God talks about Bel in the scriptures, the tone is completely different. In Isaiah, it says, "Bel boweth down, Nebo stoopeth. Their idols were upon the beasts and upon the cattle. Your carriages were heavy loaden. They are a burden to the weary beast." In other words, when Babylon falls, the so-called mighty God becomes dead weight. Literally, the statues of Bel are hauled away like luggage. And the contrast couldn't be clearer. While the God of Israel carries his people, Bel is a burden people have to carry. Diana, she was the goddess of hunting, fertility, and the moon. And for the people of Ephesus, basically the city's official patroness. Her temple in Ephesus was so enormous and iconic that it was considered one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Tourism, business, devotion, everything revolved around her. Literally a blend of religion and marketing. In Acts 19, when Paul begins preaching the gospel in Ephesus, people start converting, and that threatens the income of craftsmen who made little idols of Diana. The result? A full-blown riot. The whole city panics and starts shouting for 2 hours straight, "Great is Diana of the Ephesians." It was like a religious fan base losing their minds because the gospel was hurting their profits. Devotion to Diana was filled with sensuality and mysticism. Her worship involved priestesses, some with sexual roles, occult practices, and idolatry deeply tied to nature and fertility. The temple was a cultural symbol of pride, but behind it all was deep spiritual blindness. Now, if you want to go deeper in your Bible study, check out my exclusive resource, Mind Maps of all the books of the Bible, designed to make your learning easier and more effective. You'll also get bonus material.
There's some spooky shit in the woods here. You know, we don't
Here's
have...
especially, I think, the deep woods here.
Big time.
If Bigfoot's alive, he's here.
There's some spiritual stuff going on around here.
I agree.
And people have written about it for hundreds of years, particularly this part of Maine. And there are sections, there's a section, I mean, not even a mile from right where we're sitting here that I grouse hunt there's a logging road through it. And it's one of the most beautiful stretches you've ever seen of river. And it's insane, actually.
Wow.
The river has cut these incredible pools and waterfalls through the woods. And there's not one person there. I've never in my lifetime seen a person there. I'm not even sure who owns it. I've asked many times. I've never gotten an answer to who owns this land. Mm-hmm. It's big. I mean, this river's miles long, not one person. And every time I hunt there, I get, whoa, these weird feelings. Like, I want to get the hell out of here, but I know that there are grouse in here, and this is so beautiful, but like...
What's so special about down?
Some call this location the most paranormal location on the planet. Others call this whole thing just a big hoax. But what is undeniably true, and frankly what makes this case so much more interesting, is that unlike the vast majority of paranormal stories and claims, this case was put to an enormous amount of scientific scrutiny. In fact, there was a decade-long study done on this case, where PhDs and scientists converged on this one location and basically around the clock studied, all these claims of the paranormal that was happening in the area. And after a decade of research, the findings are pretty mind-blowing. And the case that I'm referring to is none other than the very famous Skinwalker Ranch. So the too long didn't read version of this story is you have a family that purchases a ranch out in Utah, and as soon as they move in, they start noticing some pretty bizarre things around their property. Everything from, some of their livestock going missing or being harmed. They have strange sightings in the woods of creatures and lights in the sky. They eventually report it to the news, and that news story gets picked up by a couple of other outlets, and a billionaire who is obsessed with researching the paranormal sees this story. He buys the property and installs an entire team of scientists and researchers to basically try to figure out what was happening at this ranch. And they spend 10 years studying this ranch. The outcome is, well, turns out some strange things really were happening there. Before we get started, if this type of content appeals to you, the kind of strange, dark, mysterious content delivered in a story format, well, if that appeals to you, that's what my channel's all about. And I post 3 to 4 times a week. So if that appeals to you, please gently ransack the like button and then turn on all notifications so you can get all of my content every time I upload every week. All right, on with the story. In the northeastern corner of Utah lies a 500-acre plot of land, it's all desert, where a ranch sits, and that is Skinwalker Ranch.
Opioid addiction gets between you and what you love. Once monthly Sublocade.
Built in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and it was actually built on a piece of land that had apparently been cursed. Prior to its construction, the Navajo tribe had a feud with the Utes Native American tribe. The Utes were selling off other Native Americans that they would capture. They would sell them into slavery to the United States. And so the Navajo, who had previously lived in the area where this ranch actually was built, they were forced off their land as the Utes came in and were rounding them up and selling them into slavery. Then before the Navajo left that area, they cursed the land with what's called the Skinwalker curse. The idea was they were going to torment the Utes tribe for the hardships they had inflicted on the Navajo. The Skinwalker curse, legend has it, is this curse where these witches descend on the area and take the form or wear the skin of various predatory animals in the area, namely large wolves and foxes. They inhabit those bodies and terrorize anybody in the cursed land. At some point, this ranch is actually built on the land that had apparently been cursed. It wasn't until many years later when owners of that ranch started seeing predatory animals doing some very strange things in and around their property that they did some research on the area, learned about this curse, and then before long, the nickname had stuck. In 1994, Terry and Gwen Sherman purchased Skinwalker Ranch. It had actually been abandoned by the previous owners for the last few years, so when they purchased it, they got it for way below market price. So they are just so excited to be moving in. They breed cattle, and so they had 500 acres to let their cattle free roam. It was like the dream purchase for this family. And so when they finally do move in, like the day they move in, they don't really care that the grass is overgrown. It looks like things are kind of in disrepair. And in fact, when they go into the homestead, like the actual house on the property, they were so excited about everything that they kind of overlooked some of the strange things that they immediately noticed about the property. They go inside and every window has a deadbolt on it. The inside and outside of every door in the house, not just the doors leading outside, doors leading between rooms had locks, the front and back side. They noticed these big pikes that were driven into the ground at the front door and back door of the property with massive chains stringing off of them, which looked like, pretty powerful guard dogs had been there. They're thinking to themselves, well, this is a huge piece of property. Perhaps the previous owners are a little bit paranoid because they're kind of isolated. And so they didn't really raise a red flag when, to be honest, had I moved into a property where every single door and window had multiple locks on it, they had these big guard dogs, I'd probably ask a couple questions. But you know what? Terry and Gwen, they're just so excited about this purchase that, again, they kind of just overlook it. So on the day that they are moving in, Terry and Gwen have some family members over to help them offload trucks and move stuff into the homestead. And it's during this process as they're moving things out of the truck into the house. And again, you got to remember that the house is situated like right in the middle of the property, and you can see in every direction basically unobstructed because it's basically open desert, with the exception of a couple areas that are, basically forests. And as they're offloading some of the stuff into the house, Terry looks out at one of these tree lines and he notices this huge wolf, or what looks like a wolf, pretty well off in the distance, kind of meandering its way over towards them. But it's far enough off that this is not enough to be totally worried about it. After all, Terry was a rancher and his family were fairly rugged. They carried weapons and they were used to, protecting their livestock from predators. So this was not a, oh my goodness, I can't believe a wolf is near us. It was more like, okay, let's make a note that there's a wolf walking towards us. And so Terry he tells his family, hey guys, just so you know, there's a wolf coming towards us right now. And the whole family is now standing near the truck and they're watching this wolf. And Terry recalled as he's staring out watching this wolf, it's kind of almost walking in like a snake, like a serpentine path towards them from hundreds of yards out. It's still quite a ways out. Terry notices that there was a fence that was out where this wolf is. And the fence was pretty big, and the spaces between posts were about 6 feet. When he had a good look at the wolf next to the fence, he could tell that the wolf was at least 6 feet long. And he was thinking, are my eyes playing a trick on me? That's an enormous wolf. That's the biggest wolf I've ever seen. But the wolf wasn't acting angry or aggressive. It was just kind of skulking its way towards him, very nonchalant, broad daylight. And at some point, Terry and the family, they're standing behind the truck, and Terry said that they all had this feeling that the wolf was not going to harm them. And the wolf got about 100 yards away, and Terry and his family are transfixed. And he even said he didn't understand why they weren't scared or why they weren't, running away or shooting at it or something, but they didn't. All of them are just standing there watching this wolf that's massive. And the wolf is wagging its tail and acting like a domesticated dog. The wolf comes over and goes up near Terry's father, who was there helping unload some of the gear they had. And Terry's father just kind of reflexively reaches out to start petting this. He's petting up at his head level, this massive wolf. And the wolf just acts like a domesticated dog and kind of rubs against his hand and then starts walking away from them, just wagging its tail and not doing anything, not causing them any harm, not snarling, not growling, nothing. But just as nonchalantly as it walked over to them, it walks over to where they had a pen with a couple of cows and calves inside of this pen. And one of the calves had its head through the post that was keeping them in this cage, just kind of watching this wolf. And the wolf notices it and in an instant jumps over to this calf and immediately has the whole head of the calf in its jaws, just trying to rip it out of the cage. But it can't get it to squeeze through the cage. And so all of a sudden, Terry and his family are broken out of this weird trance. And Terry starts firing shots at the wolf. It strikes the wolf and has no impact. They run over, they start hitting it with the back end of an axe. They're trying to get this thing off of the calf because their livestock, that was their livelihood. And these are rugged people, and so they're trying to fight to save their property, to save their cows. And the wolf is just totally unaffected. It's not trying to attack Terry or his son that are trying to get rid of it. The wolf is just trying to attack the cow, but it won't let go. And finally, it just kind of gives up on the calf, starts kind of retreating. Terry ends up getting his rifle, a high-powered rifle, and takes a shot at the wolf one more time. But again, it just has no impact on the wolf. And the wolf just at some point, just as, I guess, bored, turns around and kind of trots off into the woods. After they kind of were brought out of that initial trance, that they remember this horrible smell, this like foul, almost chemical smell that just permeated the whole area after the wolf was there. Terry and his son, they decided to go track this wolf because now there's this massive predator that's going to make owning cattle extremely difficult, and so they would have to go deal with this predator. And so instead of retreating into the house, they grab their weapons and they track the wolf that's now jogged off into the forest. And they make it to an area in the forest where the ground is very muddy and sodden. And Terry could easily make out these footprints that just suddenly stop. And they just couldn't make sense of it. And so they went back to the house and they told their family, like, we tracked it into the woods. There's no blood trail. There's nothing. It just walked in and vanished. So this is day one of being at this ranch, and they're all on edge now. The whole family is on edge. They really don't know what to make of that wolf. The sheer size of it, the fact that it was totally unaffected by being shot multiple times. You know, there's real concern over their own livelihood because they keep cattle and they're only going to have more that are going to be out in these pens. And if there are wolves that are 3 times the size of a normal wolf that are walking around killing cattle, that's a big problem if you own cattle. And so they're on edge, and they're all in a way trying almost not to talk about how crazy and how bizarre that encounter with the wolf was. They're just like, they're treating it like it's just a normal predator problem. Like, man, we gotta get those wolves, we gotta protect our cattle. But in the back of everybody's minds, they're like, something very strange is happening here. Gwen, she was having some other very strange things that were happening to her that she was not tying to the wolf thing. She was just noticing a couple of distinct things that were happening to her that made her think that she actually had a very real like medical problem, that she had like, you know, true memory issues. Because 2 things happened. One, in that first week, she had gone to the grocery store, and when she came back, she put the groceries away, and then she left to go to the other room. And when she came back, all the groceries were now back in the bags. And so for like 20 minutes, she's just sitting there like dumbfounded with, did I put the groceries away? Same day, she goes to take a shower, and she hangs her towel in the bathroom like anyone would, and she takes a shower, and then when she gets out, the towel's missing. And she's like, huh, she gets another towel and she towels off, and then she finds the towel hanging up in a closet on the other side of the house. And so between the groceries and the towel, she's like, is there something wrong with me? Am I like having a stroke? Am I having a medical issue here that I'm like literally losing my mind? And it wasn't until Terry actually had a similar experience that she started to wonder if this had to do with maybe that strangeness with the wolf, that maybe there's just something odd happening about this property. And it was Terry, in that first week, he had been digging holes for a new fence. And he had this big fence digging tool. It was about 70 pounds that he was using to dig the holes for the fence. And so he had taken a break after making a bunch of posts for this fence. He took a break, left his fence digging tool, you know, at the last place he had dug a post, and he went in to grab a bite to eat, came back out, and his fence digger is missing. And initially he just goes into the house and he's like, hey, you know, to his wife, to his kids, like, did you guys move my fence digger? Like, do you know what happened to it? Like, where is it? It's not out there. And they're like, no, we've been in the house the whole time. I have no idea. And so they couldn't find it. And a week goes by, and he's out patrolling his property looking for wolves. And in the tree, like well away from where he had been digging the post before, in the tree, his fence digging tool that's 70 pounds is like 70 feet in the air, strung up in this tree. So Terry comes back to the house and he tells his family about the fence digging tool being in the tree. And that's when Gwen tells Terry about her experiences with the groceries going back in the bag and a towel being moved around the house. And everybody in the family starts to really start being scared. We can't explain what's happening on this property, and we're very isolated. And what's the deal with all these locks on all the doors? I mean, they're starting to feel really concerned. Following the fence digging tool being found, Terry started to notice lights on his property. Initially, because this was the first couple of weeks they're there, he would see lights way at the far end of his property that looked like headlights, and he would think someone must have made a wrong turn that wound up on my property, and we were kind of out in the middle of nowhere, and they'll just leave. And so when he first started seeing these lights, that's what he assumed it was, just people making a wrong turn. But he started to see it so often that he wondered if people were illegally hunting on his property. And so one night he sees these lights on his property and he goes out to investigate. In fact, he's angry. He's had all these strange things happen. His family's on edge, and now he's mad and he's going to take it out on this person who's illegally hunting on his property. And he starts charging out to these lights and he starts getting closer and closer, and he starts to realize it's not making any sound. If this was like a truck, it's not making any sound. And we're in an area where I could totally hear that if it was a vehicle, and he can't hear anything. And as he gets closer and closer, the lights start retreating from him without making a sound and then float up into the sky and disappear. And Terry's like, what is going on here? The winter rolls around and it's a particularly brutal winter. And one night he couldn't account for one of his cows. And so he's out looking for this one stray cow, and he searches his whole property, and there's only one area that he hasn't searched, and it's that forest where that giant wolf had disappeared after marching in there, and they tracked it in there. And so he goes in there, and as soon as he gets to the tree line, he notices there's a bunch of footprints from what looks like a cow. And he's relieved because it's probably his. He follows it into the woods, and much like the wolf that had just disappeared in that muddy, sodden area in the forest, in the same spot, the footprints that appeared to be this cow had also just, disappeared. And then over the course of the remainder of the winter, that would happen 4 more times. The animals would run away and just disappear without a trace. By the end of the winter, after all these animals have just mysteriously disappeared, Terry and his family, but Terry in particular, has really gone into full paranoia mode. He at night would just stalk his own property, hiding behind bushes with his weapon, and hope to see what was taking his cattle. And so one night, as he's doing another fruitless search around his property, he catches out of his periphery what looks like a kind of mass of something moving around in the trees near his property. And at this point, he was kind of obscured by some shrubs and some plants. And so he kind of crouched down and looked out at the tree line. And he sees in the tree line this strange shape kind of moving about inside of the trees. And he would describe the mass as looking almost like a stealth fighter jet, but really small. And it was making no sound, and it was hovering about 20 feet off the ground. And he's crouched down, not making a sound, watching it. And it's just kind of moving around the tree line, and it has these lights that looks to be kind of scanning the ground. And it's just kind of moving around, it's shining these lights, these multicolored lights in the ground. And Terry moves a tiny bit to get a better angle on this thing. And he makes the tiniest of noises against the brush, just like a tiny little barely audible sound. And this mass that's pretty far away, the lights immediately turn off, and it angles itself so it's facing directly at Terry. And Terry can feel it right away that it's heard this tiny little sound he's made, and now it's staring directly at Terry. And Terry's terrified, and he's looking at this thing, wondering oh my God, is it gonna come take me? What is this? Is this the thing that's been taking my livestock? And he's terrified, and he's staring at it, and it just flies away. By the spring of 1995, things have gotten really, really bad for Terry and his family. Now, not only are they losing livestock inexplicably, but they're showing up, the actual cows themselves are showing up back on their property, hours or days later, just kind of in random locations on the property, and they look like they've had surgery done, precision cuts, and pieces of them are missing. And in addition, some very strange things are happening at the house. At night, they would see these entities walking around their property, these humanoid They described them as having no expression, just walking around their property. And sometimes they would walk right up to the glass, put their hands on the glass and look in, but there was no face. And like Terry and his family, they had blinds down and they would use the deadbolts on every single door and window, but they could hear them rapping at the glass and they could hear them communicating in a language they didn't understand right outside of their house. And this became so regular that it was almost impossible to sleep. Terry's kids started performing very poorly in school because they weren't sleeping. Terry's wife, Gwen, she lost her job at the bank because she wasn't sleeping and she was like delusional. They were all just at an absolute breaking point. Terry is now feeling totally disheartened. One night he's sitting on his porch with his rifle and he notices out on the horizon a new phenomenon. He was used to seeing the lights on his property that would be off in the distance that would disappear. And, he had previously seen that kind of like fighter jet thing that was scanning the area. Like those were two types of lights he would see, but there was a new light he saw as he's sitting on his porch.
With Ashley's next-gen Nuvella Performance fabric, you can relax. These pieces are easy to clean, and some styles feature machine washable covers. Discover next-gen Nuvella at Ashley.
We can tell you Carl's Jr.'s new $5.99 Cali XL burger has double the beef of a Big Mac for less. Or we could show you the new Cali XL. More meat, not more expensive. Only at Carl's Jr.
Almost like this orangey orb that appeared off in the distance. Since he had his rifle with a high-powered scope on it, he just lifts up his rifle and he looks through his high-powered scope and he zooms in all the way. And he can see that this orb, he describes it as a portal, that as he's looking at it, it has almost like an oval shape to it. And even though it was nighttime, in the middle of the orange orb is this blue sky. It's as if he's looking through a portal into another world where it's broad daylight and there's a sky. And he doesn't know what to make of it, but he can see that a black figure is crawling out of this portal into his property. And it looks just like the black entities that were kind of basically walking around his property at night. In addition to these figures that are crawling, like imagine that scene from The Ring where the girl crawls out of the well. They're crawling out of this portal into his property and then scurrying away into the tree line. And he sees weird craft as well coming into his property through this portal, and then the portal shuts and disappears. Following this night with the orange portal, Terry started to notice blue orbs that he and his family would say were the worst and most terrifying thing of all of the things they experienced. And considering they had tall, featureless black humanoids peering in their windows and rapping on their windows, that's saying something, okay? So a blue orb started showing up on their property. And the way they described it, Terry and his family, was whenever the orb came near you, it gave you this extreme sense of anxiety. It was almost like it was emitting this feeling that you automatically got where suddenly you were unbelievably anxious and terrified of the blue orb. And then as soon as it left, you would, not be anxious anymore. And so one night he's sitting on his porch like he had begun doing, and he sees this orb show up on his property. And his 3 dogs are sitting with him that see the orb, and they start growling and barking. And so he lets his dogs go, thinking that maybe they can scare this thing off. And the dogs take off running towards this blue orb, and they chase it, and you can see the orb, Terry can see the orb that starts to kind of retreat. And he's thinking, oh my goodness, I finally won something. My attack dogs are gonna scare this orb away. And they chase off into the woods, and he sees this thing, the blue orb, retreat into the woods. And then when he's thinking again that finally a little victory for us, he hears his dogs yelping, and he's too terrified to go check it out. And so he ends up going inside and locking the doors, locking the windows like they had been, and just kind of retreating. So the next day, when the dogs haven't returned, Terry and his son, they go out looking for the dogs in the forest. And when they get out there, they get to a clearing and they find 3 stacks of ashes in like little burned out circles, as if there had been a fire previously in these 3 little spots. And it turned out it was the ashes of his 3 dogs that had gone into the woods. They had just been vaporized. Terry decides that it's time to leave, and he wants to sell the ranch. And so he puts the property up for sale, and goes to a local news outlet and he tells them about what's happening on his property. And as fate would have it, a billionaire by the name of Robert Bigelow, who had invested millions of dollars in standing up this scientific research team, this all-star team of PhDs, specifically to research what he described as high strangeness, which really is just paranormal. Basically, he was obsessed with the paranormal and wanted to investigate the paranormal. And he had actually seen that fairly obscure story. When he saw that it was up for sale, Robert Bigelow, the billionaire, saw this great opportunity to buy the piece of property and actually make it the headquarters of his own scientific research team, not only to investigate what was happening on Skinwalker Ranch, but use it as kind of a hub to do other scientific research. So he purchases the ranch, and Terry actually, even though he did not want to spend any time at the ranch, on some level wanted to know what the research was going to show, because he was very curious, like, what is going on at this ranch that's been plaguing my family? So he offers to stay on as kind of like the ranch manager, because, you know, Robert Bigelow and his team are a bunch of scientists and business people. They don't have any experience on the ranch, and so they're happy to keep him. So Terry is still connected to the ranch, but at this point he's sold it to Robert Bigelow. So Robert Bigelow's scientific team was called the National Institute for Discovery Science, or NIDS, N-I-D-S, NIDS for short. And Bigelow had actually built the team before purchasing Skinwalker Ranch. And what he went out and did is he recruited some of the most incredible scientists and PhDs he could possibly recruit, but he didn't want people that were interested in the paranormal. He wanted people that were inherently skeptical, so that if he was ever able to kind of prove the existence of high strangeness, that he would have credibility in doing that. And so he went out and found these incredibly skeptical, incredibly smart scientists and PhDs. And so they move into Skinwalker Ranch, and the first thing they do is they need to start doing testing to make sure that this whole all the stories about Skinwalker Ranch coming from Terry and his family were not just some grand illusion by the family, that, you know, they could have just made it up. And so they get in there and they start running these tests. So that first year, as they're running these tests, which are largely things like, okay, let's check the environment and see if there aren't any, you know, plants that are giving off spores that could be hallucinogenic that they're breathing in. Let's check their water supply and make sure there wasn't something happening in their water supply. Let's do psychological assessments of the family. Let's ask neighbors. Let's do all of our diligence to make sure it's not something environmental or psychological. And over that first year, while they're doing this research, there isn't much activity at the ranch, save a couple of instances where there were some strange lights. So that first year is fairly uneventful, but what's important is that the NIDS researchers come to a conclusion that this did not seem like a hallucination. This did not seem like a something coming from, you know, a plant or water supply. This seemed like the Terry and his family were really experiencing something odd. They just didn't know what it was. Terry and actually Gwen, who was helping him, were tagging some of the new calves, the new cows that had been born, putting these little tags in their ears. And so Gwen was there helping. And so Terry and Gwen, they tagged this new calf, put a yellow tag in its ear, and they move on and they're tagging other animals. And so for about 40 minutes, their eyes and their attention are not focused on this one calf or that one area of the ranch. They're tagging other animals, and then their dog that was with them starts growling and reacting in the direction of where this calf had been. And so Terry and Gwen turn around and they look and they don't see anything, and they start walking over. They find the calf that they had tagged about 40 minutes ago has been basically surgically dissected, and all that's left are its legs and its head. And in addition, the ear where that tag was had been removed. And so they immediately call over the NIDS researchers. So the NIDS veterinarian comes over and looks at the scene and just can't make sense of it, because the incisions on the calf were so well done that it looked like someone with real surgical expertise had done this on an operating table. There was no sign that this was done by a predator, and there was no blood anywhere. So this prompts a massive search of the property, because in many ways, this is what the NIDS researchers are looking for. are real occurrences of something that is highly strange that they can go investigate. And so all of the researchers and everybody there begins searching the property for whoever was responsible for this dissection of the cow. And they start searching the property, and the dogs, they had all these guard dogs that were kept at each of these observation posts that they had set up around the ranch as soon as the NIDS team had moved in. They were all looking in the same direction, all four of these four observation posts, and they're all cowering in the back of their cages, all looking in the same direction. And so they start making their way towards the tree line where all these dogs are looking, and they stop short when Terry says, "I see something in the tree." So they stop their car and they're looking, and in the tree is this massive wolf, this like wolf-like humanoid that's basically perched on a tree limb. And Terry takes out his rifle and he aims at the creature up in the tree, this huge creature, and everybody sees it. All the NIDS researchers are looking at this creature and they're like, "Oh my God, what is that?" Terry starts firing at this thing and it just disappears into the woods. And so the team charges into the woods, they fan out, and they pick up a couple of tracks of this huge thing that has like this massive footprint with these huge claws. But much like the wolf that had disappeared and the cattle that had suddenly disappeared when they went into the woods, they couldn't find any traces of this thing. But they did smell this horrible stench that Terry remembered smelling. It stuck with him that first day when that large wolf had come over on the very first day they were moving in. It was that same smell, but they couldn't find this huge animal. So dumbfounded, the NIDS researchers just go back to the property and no one can make sense of it. And they have the footprint and they have their own eyewitness testimony, but like they couldn't make sense of how something that big could just get away. And so over the following month, they're like searching the property and they're looking for any more signs of this huge creature or anything. The only thing they noticed is that the guard dogs consistently stayed in their kennels and did not want to come out. They were acting like they were kind of being hunted, and they were they were cowering quite a bit, and they were scared to go out in the open, but they couldn't find anything. So it was around this time that Terry and Gwen are kind of back to doing work around the ranch, and one day they're driving off to one section of the ranch and they pass by the corral where 4 of their prized bulls were. These are very expensive animals that are all in this enclosure. And so they drive past and they take a mental note that they're seeing these bulls in this enclosure, and they drive off to the other side of the ranch where they're doing some work, tagging animals and building fences, whatever it is they were doing. But when they come back and they round a corner where they're first able to see that corral of bulls again, they are like, where are they? Because the bulls were not in their enclosure and they weren't anywhere. And so they're panicked because these are very expensive animals, and they run over, and Terry sees that the gates to the corral are still locked, but there's no bulls in there. There's no sign of a struggle or anything. And it just so happens that right next to the corral was this fairly small trailer that hadn't been used in years. In fact, it was literally wired shut. It was just sitting there. And Terry, just for whatever reason, runs over and looks in one of the windows. And inside of this tiny enclosure are these 4 bulls, completely calm, all crammed into this tiny trailer. They could barely fit. They're not fighting with each other or anything. They're just calmly sitting there as if they're in some kind of a trance. And Terry yells to Gwen, like, "Hey, they're over here. They're right here." And it like startles the bulls out of their trance. They start panicking and kicking, and they end up getting them out of this enclosure, and it takes them hours to finally round them up and get them back in the corral. But they're unharmed. But it is almost impossible to get even one bull into that small of an enclosure. It would take hours to maybe be successful at doing that.
Guitar Center is your one-stop shop for unique gifts. And with 48-month financing on top brands, you can stay on budget and win big this holiday season.
4 bulls into that enclosure was pretty much impossible. And to do it when they basically were calm after they were in there is also somewhat impossible. And it was important to note that Terry saw when he looked in the window that the only entrance to that trailer was wired shut still. It had not been undone. In fact, the cobwebs at the corner where the opening basically formed with the sides of the trailer, they were still intact, like it had not opened. And it made no sense how those bulls got in there. And so the NIDS researchers come over and they can't make sense of it either. Upon further investigation, the NIDS researchers found that the bars of the corral that held the bulls, a section of it had been highly magnetized. And so while they're doing this research, trying to figure out if magnetic fields has anything to do with the strange occurrences at the ranch, two of the NIDS researchers were on the outskirts of the property using their compass to look for magnetic fields, and they started smelling. They both reported smelling that horrible metallic, like rotting smell that other people had reported smelling anytime they saw that large wolf creature. And when they started smelling it, their compass started to flitter and then pointed away from north towards wherever the smell was. And they remember thinking that they felt like they were being watched. And it went on for a few moments and their compass didn't waver. It was aimed in the direction of the smell, and they're both on opposite sides pointing in the same direction. And then at some point, the smell stops and they stop feeling anxious, and the north arrows go back to the way they should have been. And then one of the most terrifying of all of the paranormal occurrences that happened at Skinwalker Ranch happened at the very end of 1997. Two NIDS researchers were up on a ridgeline overlooking the homestead. Every night it became commonplace to basically position NIDS researchers all over the property to basically be on the lookout for weird things that are happening. And these two researchers are up on this ridge, kind of obscured and hidden, and they see this orange orb take shape right near the homestead. And one of them had an infrared goggles, and so he looks down at the orb, and he can clearly make out that it's this oval-shaped opening that sounded an awful lot like what Terry had seen on his porch when he saw that humanoid creature crawling out of the portal into his property. Well, these two researchers are looking at this portal, and they see the same thing. They see this black human-like creature crawling out of this orange portal onto the ground, and then it starts running up the hill towards them. And they're like frozen with fear. They start smelling that horrible rotting metallic smell as this big human-like creature bounds up the mountain, and they can hear the shale under its feet as it runs up, and it goes right past them. About 30 feet away from them, they're looking at it, and it just barrels past them at a full sprint up into the mountainside. The following year, in 1998, the activity on the ranch declined significantly. All they had was the occasional strange lights here and there, but for the most part, it was done. And in fact, even though NIDS remained on the property, by 2004, the research just wasn't amounting to anything, so they pulled the plug on the operation. They did have footage of a number of the lights that were seen, but again, no one's gonna take a picture of some random lights and say, oh, there you go, proof. You know, they demonstrated that there were, magnetic fields, and they have images of these calves that would reappear after looking like they'd had surgery done to them. They had hundreds of eyewitness reports. They have all this information, but none of it was really definitive proof, which was very frustrating to Robert Bigelow, to Terry and his family. And the way they described it is they felt like they were dealing with an entity or a group of entities that were just consistently one step ahead of them, that they could catch glimpses of what they were doing, but it was never enough to really understand what was happening. They never felt like they were in control. It was always clear that this entity or these entities were in control of the situation, and they never were in a good position to really record hard data or get good footage. Not to mention, this is 1998, this is the late 90s. No one just had an iPhone they can pull out and snap pictures. You had real cameras. And so the best they could do was some pictures of light and some of the animals that had been mutilated. There's been numerous books put together by some of the people that were a part of this NIDS research team, and to this day they believe that what they saw was a result of some paranormal activity. And to this day, many people believe that this is one of the most credible instances of paranormal activity occurring. So I'd love to hear what you think in the comments, whether you think this is a total fact or a total hoax or somewhere in the middle. I'd love to hear about it.
Adobe Acrobat Studio.
There's a house in Gary, Indiana that has been dubbed the Demon House. Now, if you were to walk past this house on the street, it wouldn't stand out to you. It's a very modest, single-story, 3-bedroom home. Looks like all the other houses around it. But the history behind this house is totally bizarre. LaToya Ammons, who was a mother of 3 that lived inside of this house with her 3 kids, she began to report to the police that demons were throwing her children against the wall. Now, when police got the report that children are being thrown against the wall, their first thought is, you're an unfit parent. And so they sent Child Protective Services and the police to go check out this residence and make sure that she really was a competent parent. They are shocked at what they find. And what they find is documented in a police report. And courtesy of the executive producer of 317 Films, Christopher Geizot, I have a copy of said police report, and when I read through this thing for the first time, I literally wrote him an email and said, this is fake. There's no way this is an actual police report. And he said, no, that's real. It's from the Lake County Sheriff's Department. It is the official police report, and it's mind-blowing. Today, I'm going to tell the story of what happened when the police got involved, and I'm just going to use information that was in the police report. But before we get into today's crazy story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right channel, because that's all I do, and I upload 3 to 4, even 5 times every week. And so if you're interested in that, I would encourage you to gently take the like button out for a nice seafood dinner and never call it again. That's so weird. And also sub to my channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. All right, let's get into the story. After numerous reports that LaToya Ammons was mistreating her children, based on reports that she gave, she was telling police that demons were throwing her kids around the house. Based on those reports, Child Protective Services was sent to do a home study, to go to their house, go to LaToya Ammons' house, and make sure it was a safe, clean place for children to be living. In addition to the case manager, her name was Valerie Washington, who was going to be going over to do this home study, the Lake County Sheriff Department also sent over Lieutenant Gruszka, who would be assisting Valerie and watching the home study take place. When Gruszka arrives at the house, he is met with Valerie Washington, also LaToya Ammons, the mother, and her 2 sons, Andrew, who's 9, and Amante, who's 7, as well as LaToya's mother, so the boy's grandmother. Her name was Rosa. Washington, the case manager, pulls Gruszka aside out of earshot of LaToya and her family, and she starts telling Gruszka about what happened at the hospital 8 days earlier, because she, the case manager, had already begun investigating LaToya Ammons and that whole situation with her kids. 8 days earlier, Washington was at the hospital sitting in a waiting room. Washington was with a psychologist, and they were speaking to Rosa, who was the grandmother of these children. In the room was also Andrew, the oldest son, and Amante, the youngest son. And as they're chatting, Amante, the youngest son, stands up and walks to the middle of the waiting room. And his eyes roll back into his skull, and he begins emitting this growling sound that sounded too deep for a boy of 7 years old. The grandmother reacted to it like she had seen it before. She got right up, she marched over to him, and she took him by the hands, and she yelled, "You are not you." And she kept saying that, and the boy's eyes are still back in his head, and he's not responding to anything his grandmother's saying. As Rosa is repeating over and over again, "You are not you," Amante begins backpedaling towards a wall behind him. And Rosa holds his hands the whole time. She's holding his hands firmly. He gets to the wall, and instead of stopping, he puts his foot up against the wall. This is a 7-year-old boy, and begins walking up the wall by pressing against Rosa. And she's holding on tight, and he's pressing back at her and using that weight to walk backwards up the wall. The psychologist in Washington are just watching in disbelief. Rosa's holding on to him as he walks all the way up to where he's on his tippy toes on the wall. And then he flips forward in front of her and lands on his feet on the other side of Rosa. The psychologist and Washington literally run out of the room, and they go get a doctor, and they explain what happened. The doctor comes in, not having any clue what to make of this, and just says to the boy, "Can you do that again?" And Amante at this point, his eyes are back to normal, and he's sitting now next to Rosa. And he says, "What? I didn't do anything," and acted like he had not been walking up the walls. Now, it's not in the report how Lieutenant Gruszka responds to Washington's story about the hospital. However, the entire police report that I'm pulling all this information from is written by Lieutenant Gruszka at the end of the investigation. So this exchange between he and the case manager, Washington, about the hospital visit that he was not part of, it apparently carried weight in the entire investigation, that he felt compelled to add it into the report. Even though on paper, you would think if you're doing a home study for this house, why would you incorporate something that didn't have anything to do with the house? It gives you maybe an insight into Lieutenant Gruszka, although his language remains super professional and very pragmatic, that perhaps Lieutenant Gruszka at the end of this investigation was starting to think this might be paranormal. After this story, 2 more police officers show up to the house to assist with this home study. One was Brian Miller and the other was Charles Austin. At this point, the 3 officers, Gruszka, Miller, and Austin, along with the case manager, Washington, begin walking towards the family and towards the front door of the house. LaToya says that she and her kids will not go back in the house because they had moved out very recently because of the strangeness that they claim was happening inside of the house. They felt like they were under attack by demons. And so the police, they needed someone to bring them in. And so Rosa, the grandmother, LaToya's mother, she offered to go in with them. Offered to go in with them. So the house is a single-story, 3-bedroom house. You walk in and you're inside of the screened-in porch. You go into the main level. There's a few bedrooms, and then there's a stairwell that leads down into the basement. And so they go in, and Lieutenant Gruszka is in charge of taking pictures and recording audio the whole time they're in the house. They were not aware that they had already moved out. So it's a bit of an awkward home study because they're not even living there anymore. But either way, they're going to do their job. They're walking around, taking pictures of each of the bedrooms. There's 3 bedrooms, there's a kitchen, basic stuff upstairs. And then they go downstairs to the basement. Now, the basement was where LaToya and her family claimed the majority of the paranormal activity was taking place. The steps leading down to the basement were wood. They went down into the basement. The basement floor was concrete and the walls were concrete blocks. As they go down, Lieutenant Gruszka would notice that there were candles that had been placed all over the basement floor that had burned down to their wick. There was also an altar and a nativity scene that had been placed near the underside of the stairs. And so when Gruszka goes over to take pictures of the altar and the nativity scene, he recognizes that under the stairs, near where those 2 things are placed, it's all dirt. The concrete that made up the floor of the basement had been broken away, and there was jagged pieces of concrete where there should have been a continuous flow of concrete underneath the steps. It had been snapped up and broken away. It was gone. When Rosa was questioned about the strangeness of the basement with all the candles and the altar, she just said that there's a presence down here, and that's all she was able to articulate. The other officers and the case manager and Rosa, they go back upstairs, and Lieutenant Gruszka and Charles Austin, the other officer, they stay in the basement and take a few extra pictures, a couple more underneath the stairs, and just of the candles before they ultimately go upstairs as well. When Gruszka comes upstairs, Rosa's waiting for him, and she's about to turn the light off leading down into the basement, and she asks him, "Did you get any pictures underneath the stairs?" And he said, Yeah, I did. I stayed down there and I took some more pictures. She looks at him and she says, "Sometimes at night when we're sleeping on the main floor, we'll hear commotion in the basement. It sounds like maybe someone bumping on the underside of the stairs. And then you hear footsteps walking up the wood steps. And whatever it is stops on the other side of the door leading into the main floor, and it will stay there for hours. We're too scared to open the door to look." Gruszka goes back to his office and he immediately uploads the pictures that he took with a focus on the ones he took in the basement. And he finds that there is a couple pictures he took under the stairs, that in the right-hand corner of the picture, just behind one of the steps, it's partially obscured, is a white mist or a white cloud. And he zooms in on it and he brings in other officers and they look at it. And if you zoom in close enough, it looks like a man's face. As they're zoomed in on this mist underneath the stairs, they can see, only because they've zoomed in, that there appears to be a faint green mist on the left side of the picture. Appears to be a woman's face. Gruszka and Austin, who were the only two in the basement at the time of these pictures taken, swear they did not see a white or green mist under the stairs when they took pictures. Gruszka, again, it doesn't say in the report how he's feeling, but you can imagine he's starting to feel a little bit uneasy about what he's witnessing. Gruszka just goes to his audio recording. And so he fast forwards to the section where he and Austin are alone in the basement taking these additional photos. And you can clearly hear on the recording Gruszka and Austin talking to each other as they're taking these pictures. And at some point, as they're taking these pictures of the basement, a third voice, not Austin, not Gruszka, say directly into the audio recorder, "Hey." The audio recorder was one that Gruszka was used to using, and it had never malfunctioned before. And he and Austin were the only ones down there. And so they couldn't explain where the third voice was coming from, and neither could any of the other officers who listened to it. On April 30th, Gruszka set up a meeting with Latoya Ammon's priest, who she was very close with. They were regular churchgoers. This priest, his name was Father Maginot, he had been at the Ammons' residence 5 days before this home visit was done, when Latoya Ammons and her family was still living in that residence. And so Gruszka went to interview him to get a sense of what it was like when they were still living there. Father Maginot said he was there because Latoya had reached out and said, "I don't know what to do because she's claiming there are demons here." And while they're sitting in the living room on the main floor, Father Maginot is telling Gruszka that the bathroom light started flickering on and off. And so it was distracting enough that ultimately Father Maginot got up and walked over to the bathroom. And as soon as he went inside, the flickering stopped. And then he'd go back down and sit down and it would start again. Repeatedly, Father Maginot would get up when it was flickering. He would go in and it would stop. He'd come back and it would start flickering again. So while this is happening and Father Maginot is going back and forth to the bathroom trying to figure out why the light is flickering, Latoya points out that a liquid is forming on one of the window blinds in the room that they were all sitting in. There was this oily liquid substance that was just kind of trickling down the window blinds. And Father Maginot walks over and looks at it. They're all looking at it, and there's no leak in the ceiling. There's no source for this liquid, and it hadn't been there before. At least that's what Latoya Ammons and her family is saying, that that's not from us. We don't know what that is. As they're looking at this oily substance on the blinds, the cord that controls the blind itself starts swaying back and forth. And everyone's startled as they're looking at it because there's no draft in the room. The window's not open. There's no reason it should be swaying. While they're looking at this cord, Father Maginot looks down and sees this huge footprint in the carpet near where they're standing that was too big to be his, and nobody else in the house had a footprint that was that big. At this point, Father Maginot doesn't think it's safe for the family to be there and advises her to leave. And this would actually be the episode that prompts Latoya Ammons and her family to leave the house and not come back. On May 10th,
we designed this as a full 2110 core facility, all IP-based. Lumen provides us with high-capacity fiber network and helped us establish redundancy and diversity.
Leave the house and not come back. On May 10th, Lieutenant Gruszka, a new Child Protective Services case manager, and a host of police officers go back to the Ammons residence. The Ammons residence has been unoccupied with all utilities shut off, locked and sealed since the last time they were there, which was on April 27th. So it's a 2-week period that no one has been in the house. But there was a customary follow-up to this house. They had to as part of the home study. When Lieutenant Gruszka arrives at the property, outside is Father Maginot, as well as Latoya Ammons, her mother, Rosa, Latoya's 2 sons, Andrew and Amante, as well as a host of police officers. There's a canine unit that's there. Although it's not said explicitly in the report, it would appear that the reason there's all this additional police presence in a canine unit is because there's enough weirdness being reported about the house. There could be, a home invasion situation happening, that somebody else is living in this house. Any number of things could be happening, but they can't write off all of the strange testimony about what's happening in the house. And so before they go in for this second home study, they have one of the dogs from the canine unit go into the property and search the property for intruders, just in case this was a home invasion or something like that. They wanted to just check the box. So they send the dog in, the dog comes out, hasn't found anything unusual. And so the police, along with Father Maginot, the case manager, and Rosa, they go back into the house. The main level looked untouched. There was nothing strange happening in the main level when they walked around. Nothing was disturbed. It looked like no one had been here in 2 weeks. So they open the door to the basement, they turn on the light, and a couple weird things happen right away. One, they noticed that on the steps, on the wooden steps leading into the basement, there is an oily substance with no clear origin that goes all the way down the steps, snakes around the side, and disappears underneath the stairs. As they begin walking down the stairs, the case manager from Child Protective Services happens to touch a cabinet that had been built into the walls along the stairwell leading down into the basement. And immediately she pulls her hand back. She grabs her pinky and she reacts like something had hurt her. And they ask, hey, what's going on? And she's like, I don't know, I just touched the cabinet and my hand now hurts, my pinky hurts, it's tingling. And it apparently had turned white. We don't have any images to show that, but her pinky basically had been wounded just from touching this cabinet. And so the officers go down into the basement, they follow this oily trail that goes back under the stairs, and they're thinking to themselves, all the utilities have been turned off. There's no reason there should be any water down here, not to mention there's no origin for this oily substance. And no one's been in the house for the past 2 weeks. So we can't even account for this by saying that one of the family members might have spilled something. And so even though it's not written into the report that they were scared or that they were considering this could be beyond rational explanation, it's clear from what happens next that everybody there was ready to explore the idea that something was happening underneath the steps, because now the family's claimed there's been something crawling out of there and walking up the stairs at night. You have this strange oily substance coming from the underside of the stairs. You have the white and the green apparition inside of the pictures. Father Maginot suggested that if there was some sort of demonic possession happening in the house, that there's a good chance they would find things underneath the steps that were tied to the family. And so they decide they're gonna dig up the dirt underneath the steps. And so Gruszka begins digging into this dirt patch under the steps. And he makes it about 2 feet down. And he finds a press-on pink fingernail. He also finds women's underwear. And as he keeps digging, he finds a political pin, like for your t-shirt. He also finds the lid to one of the cooking pots from upstairs. He continues to dig and he finds some trash and miscellaneous papers. And it dawns on the group that someone or something is leaving the basement, going into the main section of the house, taking things from the family, going back downstairs, going underneath the steps and burying them, and probably has been for some time. And so at some point they stopped being able to dig any farther. The soil was too hard, so they put the soil back and decide to leave the house. As they're leaving the house, Rosa is the last one to leave, and she actually says, hey, come over here. And she's standing in that screened-in porch, and she's looking up at the window blinds. On the window blinds in the house is that same, or it appeared to be the same, oily substance trickling down the blinds that matched the description of what Father Maginot had said he had seen when he was visiting the family before and saw liquid coming down the blinds. And so the officers reacted to this by saying, Rosa, did you do this? Are you responsible for putting this liquid on the blinds? And she said, no. There was no clear source for this liquid. There was no leak. There was nothing. And so Lieutenant Gruszka wipes the liquid off of the blinds and tells everyone to leave the house. For 25 minutes, they waited. And then they went back inside to see if there was going to be liquid there, and there was. And Father Maginot would say that after that first time he was there and he saw the liquid dripping down, he did some research, and it's very common over the history of time that if there's any sort of demonic possession in a house, that liquids will ooze from different areas in the house. And it's this oily substance that matches the description of what they just saw. At this point, Lieutenant Gruszka and the police tell everyone to vacate the premise. They lock it up and they leave. And that is the end of the police report. Although not included in this police report, where I pulled all of the story from, Charles Austin, who was the other officer who was in the basement with Lieutenant Gruszka when they were taking pictures underneath the steps and they heard that voice on the recorder. Well, Charles Austin actually worked for another police department, the Hammond Police Department, and he took some pictures of the outside of this house during the time that no one was staying at the house. And one of the official police pictures shows a shadowy figure standing in the screened-in porch of this house, right near where that liquid was dripping down the blinds. In 2014, Zach Bagans, who's a popular paranormal investigator, he hosts the show Ghost Adventures, he purchased the Demon House and filmed a documentary that he called The Demon House, and you can check that out for yourself, and he demolished the house in 2016. So I'd love to get your opinion on this story, because I told it based on information that was available in official police documentation. Now, that doesn't mean that it was.
It happened on an average country road, in an average house. The neighbors were aware that something was wrong with the Theriault family. The children were normal. The wife was friendly, yet constantly troubled. And the husband, Maurice. The rumor was Maurice was possessed. Raphael Abramovitz visited the Theriault house a few weeks after all hell broke loose.
Indeed, if you believe in demonic possession, that the devil can dwell in the soul of man and control his actions, then it was hell that broke loose here.
He was the Democrat of the group, he was the liberal, the tolerant liberal, and Hannity was like, sure, whatever you need. And I was like I was a nobody, and he went out of his way to like be gracious at like 6:30 in the morning. And so I always remembered that, I think you can tell a lot about people by how they treat like crew, camera guys, things like that, So he was, I always remembered him being really gracious. He was always great.
Listening to @Redacted News on YouTube. It's live. This is like November 17th, 2025.
Just to me. And
the thumbnail says that Trump has just agreed to release Epstein files. This is Nacho over.
I didn't get to see him much.
I've ended dates early because the kind of like a sort of blind date situation. But I've ended dates early because the date was rude to a server.
Can you imagine?
I'm like, nope. Nope. I have no future. I don't even want to finish this meal with you. So I'm out.
Wow. Yeah, I can't imagine. Can you imagine being with people who are rude to waiters? Those people are the worst.
Yeah.
They're the worst. Someone in the chat's asking about Greg Gutfeld. I was always friends with Greg. Greg and I got along really well. I used to do his old show called Red Eye. He would have me on.
For Nancy, wife of the possessed Maurice Theriault, it was 8 years of hell that finally exploded in a night of such evil and violence that the small farming community of Whately, Massachusetts may never fully recover. It is the story of an exorcism ritual that either failed or tragically backfired. Nancy Theriault may never recover either, but she has found peace.
He says, you're going to remember this. It's like he's fighting with somebody. He's going to put the gun in his mouth. He's not going to put the gun in his mouth. And I just sat there. Finally, he got the gun in his mouth. He pulled the trigger. His head goes back. His head goes up. His body goes back. And the only thing that I could say when he did it was amen.
He aimed the gun at her, but suddenly, the good part of Maurice somehow overtook him. He looked at her, and he put the gun in his mouth and killed himself. He could have killed her right there, but he didn't. So I see where good had taken over evil.
It may be difficult to believe that the newly widowed Nancy and her friend Ed Warren are talking about this man. The gentle, happy grandfather born to French-Canadian parents 51 years earlier in Maine. He quietly grew vegetables on his small property and in his greenhouse, and he sold them at a roadside stand in Whately. Most of the time, he was the good neighbor, affectionately known to the locals as Frenchie. But Frenchie was two people. At home with Nancy and her children from an earlier marriage, or his own children, Frenchie could turn evil without warning.
Oh, you're scary. I had many scary moments.
What do you mean?
There was, times when he got mean and he got that look on his face that he would go after my daughters or hit them or smack them. But most of it was done behind my back.
You're getting upset. What's upsetting you now? Do you want us to stop for a while?
No. What happened to my children? What they went through during this. What we all went through.
While Maurice Theriault's capacity for instant violence was terrifying for all those around him, it was the source of his violence that brought Ed and Lorraine Warren into the house.
He was possessed by a demonic spirit, maybe even more than one demonic spirit.
The Warrens, who spent years recording and assisting at exorcisms, were called in by a Catholic priest after Nancy Theriault went for help in controlling Maurice's behavior.
Such as what?
Movement of objects, sounds, bleeding from Maurice's eyes from no natural causes, crosses appearing on his body. State police were called in, local police. They found Maurice on the floor in the bathroom, and while there, they had seen phenomena occurring around Maurice: the bleeding from the mouth, the eyes, French-Canadian messages appearing on his back.
If the police and the Warrens were alarmed by the unexplained phenomena around Theriault, Nancy could describe years of terrifying events she had been too scared to report.
And all of a sudden, I turned around and I saw this whoosh go by, and it was a 2x4, flew across the greenhouse, hit him in the head, and knocked him down.
Nancy Theriault talks of witnessing endless strange happenings, and in between the apparent supernatural events, there was always the violence of Maurice. Threatening, beating, spitting, constant promises of suicide or murder. Why didn't you pick up and leave?
Because there was too many threats. And we threatened that if we did go, that, and we never even told the Warrens this, like that anything was ever said, or if the kids ever talked about anything, that the children was going to try to, my children were going to try to break us up and he'd kill one of them, or something would happen to one of them.
Finally, a decision was made. Bishop Robert McKenna, a friend of the priest who brought the Warrens to the case of Maurice Theriault, decided a full solemn exorcism was the only chance to avoid a tragedy.
This is called the Ritual Romano, which is the ultimate in the rites of exorcism where Catholicism is concerned. He prepared himself. He went to the home.
And the exorcism would be the first ever recorded on videotape. A tape that shows Maurice's face changing from this to this as the bishop chanted to cast out the devil. Nancy Theriault was present throughout the exorcism.
When they were doing the exorcism on him, when he turned his head, I saw his face change. I saw the satanic look on his face.
As the video shows, far more was about to change on Theriault's face than its expression. As Bishop McKenna chants, Theriault's skin seems to bubble. A deep crack has opened on his forehead.
Maurice, do you feel anything inside you? I see characteristics of his face look like they're becoming all crinkled, like burnt. There's a split on the left side of the head, which widens, opens up. The eyes, he blinks 3 times, which we consider an insult to the Trinity. The eyes look like a serpent.
How many are you?
All of a sudden, his eyes rolled up in his head, and his head went down. He collapsed, and within a few minutes, came to. The first thing he asked for was Nancy, his wife.
This exorcism took place on the day after Easter 1985, and for several years, Maurice Theriault seemed to become normal again.
Things seemed to be going good. In fact, he wasn't even as mean as he used to be. He was easygoing. He was easygoing and everything.
But about a year ago, Ed Warren received an ominous call from Nancy Theriault.
And she said, Ed, I have to speak with you. And she said, Maurice is going back into his old ways again. Blood is coming out of his eyes. He's doing things that he shouldn't be doing. He's threatening people.
It was the beginning of the final tragic possession of Maurice. In a few months, he would be dead.
We'll continue in a moment with the exorcism of Maurice Theriault. An exorcism that went horribly wrong. Weeks and months after Maurice Theriault underwent his torturous exorcism by the so-called New Age Catholic Bishop McKenna, he seemed to be free of whatever demons possessed him. But soon, signs of evil began to surface once again, leading to a chilling final chapter. Raphael Abramovitz continues the exorcism of Maurice Theriault.
Over and over again, the bishop said these words: "Evil spirit, tell me your name in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, in the name of the Blessed Virgin. How did you enter Maurice?" For many years, Maurice Theriault was accused by some of using trickery to fake his spontaneous bleeding and other physical phenomena. But in the exorcism conducted by Bishop McKenna, the camera captured images that nobody has been able to explain. As his skin bubbled and a crack appeared on his left temple and his eyes took on the satanic gaze of a madman, at least a dozen people were present to witness it.
Evil spirit, tell me your name.
When it was over, his skin was clear. Maurice seemed like his former self, and his wife's nightmare subsided for a time. That horrifying look on his face disappears.
Mm-hmm.
And he's back to being the Morris you know, right? The nice one.
Right.
But last year, without warning, the demons seemed to take over Maurice in a hideous final possession that would explode in bloodshed. Through the afternoon, hiding in the basement, he lay in wait for his wife to come home.
He burst through the kitchen door with a shotgun. He started to come toward me with a gun, and I had my hands on the gun with him, fighting with him. He swung and he hit me with the butt of the gun. I don't know what gave me the strength to keep going, the adrenaline or what it was.
In fear, Nancy ran from the house to beg for help from neighbors. The shotgun fired and tore off her arm.
And when I got as far as the road, I heard a bang and a crash. And they told me that he had shot through the window in the living room.
Maurice ran into the street and dragged her back inside, made her sit down and set about putting her through her final torture. He made her watch him take his own life.
He says, "You're going to remember this." And he sits down on the other sofa in front of me, which was about 5 feet away, trying to put the gun in his mouth, and he's going this way with the gun. It's like he's fighting with somebody. Finally, he got the gun in his mouth. He pulled the trigger. His head goes back, his head goes up, his body goes back. And the only thing that I could say when he did it was amen. That's the only thing I said, amen. That's the only word that would come out of my mouth. And the only other word that I said when he was pounding on me is I said, "Oh God, oh God." And he kept pounding me in the head, and I can remember him saying, "Yes, oh God." And those were the only words I said after I had the scuffle with him after he hit me. I was, "Oh God." And then when he shot himself, I said, amen. I ran up the road, and I'm screaming and yelling for help. I get up to the house on the right, and I go to the house, and I'm screaming and yelling, "Help me, help me, help me." When I looked up, I saw my landlord, which lived in the house further up from me. He was there and said, "Nancy, keep talking, Nancy, keep talking." And I started talking about the grandchildren. I was saying my prayers.
The small Theriault house on the rural country road is quiet again. Life has returned to normal in the farming community of Whately, Massachusetts. Do you ever dream about him?
I haven't had one dream about that man since this happened. I'm sorry that he had to die. I mean, I didn't want him to die. All I wanted to do was leave me alone. But I'm glad he's gone. I'm glad he's gone.
Mrs. Theriot has now found peace in this life.
You need business tech that's flexible.
Terrifying movies I have ever seen has one of the most terrifying movies I have ever seen has got to be The Exorcism of Emily Rose. What really made it scary was that it was based on a true story. The true story of Anneliese Michel, who was a 23-year-old girl living in Germany in the 70s. It was apparently possessed by demons, and there's a lot of audio recordings and some pretty incredible firsthand testimony of what happened to this poor girl. There's one scene in particular that, while it is a dramatization of what happened to Anneliese, it is certainly an accurate portrayal of what did ultimately physically happen to Anneliese Michel, and it is one of the most hair-raising, horrifying scenes in movie history. In my opinion, it is just downright disturbing. And so today I'm going to be looking at the real story that movie is based on, which is of course The Exorcism of Anneliese Michel. But before we get into today's story, if you are a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, well then you've come to the right channel, because that is literally all I do. And I upload 3, sometimes 4 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, if you could, please gently eviscerate the like button and then subscribe and turn on all post notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. All right, let's dive in. Anneliese Michel was born in 1952 in Western Germany to a fiercely religious family. Devout Catholics who believed in some of the more extreme elements of the Catholic faith. Now, one of the things that they believed in and certainly pushed on to Anneliese and her siblings was this idea that sin could not be atoned on your own. It would require other people effectively sacrificing on your behalf for you to be absolved of your sin. And so Anneliese and her siblings would be instructed by her parents to, at times in the winter, sleep on the hardwood floor in order to repent for sinners that can't repent for their sins on their own. And so she'd be laying on the floor in the middle of the winter, thinking that what she was doing was saving other people from their own sin. In 1969, Anneliese would have her first seizure. She was at school, she suddenly started seizing up and convulsing, and her classmates would later tell investigators and her family that it was almost like she'd entered into a trance-like state while she was having this seizure. And then as soon as the seizure had ended and she was done convulsing, she snapped out of the trance-like state. It wasn't until a year later when Anneliese had another seizure in the middle of the night. She had this convulsion and her parents come in and she's in this trance-like state and she's wet the bed and then she snaps out of it and she doesn't know what happened. It wasn't until this second seizure that the family actually sought medical attention. They actually went to a neurologist. That neurologist would tell Anneliese and her family that what she was suffering from was something called temporal lobe epilepsy, where, you know, amongst a litany of horrible side effects, a few of the more significant ones are serious auditory and visual hallucinations, a loss of awareness, and intense mental state. So Anneliese was prescribed medication by this neurologist to try to combat this temporal lobe epilepsy, but it didn't seem to do anything. And in fact, her seizures and convulsions and this trance-like state she would go into during the seizures, it only persisted and intensified. And it got to a point where Anneliese and her family believed the best thing for her to do would be to go to a psychiatric hospital where the staff there was better equipped to handle what was happening to her. And so she checks in willingly, and they start experimenting with different drugs, and nothing seems to work. And in fact, her condition only gets worse. She starts having more seizures and more convulsions, and she starts having a regular visual hallucination, whether she's having a seizure or not. Everywhere she looked, if she looked at anybody in the face, their face would become demonic. Like it would be a demon's face that would look at her and say, "You're going to rot in hell." And so she began not being able to look at people in the face, and she would tell the nurses and doctors, like with her head down, about these demon faces she was seeing. And it was the first time she began espousing this idea that she was in fact possessed by demons, in fact 6 demons by her count. When she passed on that information to her family that she believed she was possessed, she and her family believed that the psychiatric hospital was not enough, and in fact modern medicine was really not enough to handle what was happening to her, that they would need to search for help outside of medicine, and so they turned to the Catholic Church. Initially, all the clergy that Anneliese and her family approached to try to help her with the situation rejected her request, and they said, "You need to seek medical attention. This is not something we can help you with." Not knowing where to turn, her family is kind of at a loss. At the same time, Anneliese's condition really nosedives. I mean, it was already pretty bad. It gets a lot worse. She began doing 400 plus squats every day, like compulsively doing squats. Then she began going under the table periodically.
I think with N690 steel. So this blade will probably break if you throw it on the iron rod, and the Joe X blade will be in 1095 carbon steel, and the blade with the clip point, the N690, will be the Mesa fiber blade, and labeled as Joe X blade will be only the 1095 high carbon steel. The price will be around 200 euros, plus minus 20, I would say. And this, the sheath will be
terrifying movies I have ever seen has got to be church. Over the next 10 months, Renz would conduct Emily Rose being possessed by these demons. And think about that as you listen to the actual audio recordings of Anneliese Michel during one of her many exorcisms.
Ja, ich will auch für die anderen leiden, damit die nicht in die Hölle kommen und so. Aber dass das dann so schlimm ist und so grausam und so furchtbar, nee.
Nein, ihr Klötze. Und der Maul, ihr Klötze. Oh, und der will auch nicht. Oh.
Kind Gottes.
Ich hab ein Maul erschlagen. Die Ruhe gibt's nur da oben.
Ruhe gibt's nur dort, wo die Liebe ist.
Ja, bei uns gibt's nur ja nun. Die müssen in eigenen Seminaren ausgebildet werden, die dürfen nicht auf die anderen Universitäten. Kapiert? Nein, 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 nein,
und nie.
Initially, the exorcisms seemed to make things better for Anneliese. She got to a place where the seizures and convulsions and trance-like states and odd behavior were so few and far between that she actually re-enrolled in university and was even able to attend church, but it didn't last. In the spring of 1976, Anneliese's convulsions and seizures and odd behavior came back tenfold, and she began becoming violent with her family members to where they couldn't even be around her without being attacked by her. But when she was left on her own, she would harm herself. She stopped eating, saying that the demons were not allowing her to eat, and all day long she would stand up and then drop to her knees to pray, and then get back up and drop to her knees to pray, breaking both her kneecaps and tearing the tendons in her knees, which seemingly did not faze her. But still, her family believed that what she needed was religious intervention, not medical intervention. Also, Annalise felt the same way, but some might say that she was not in a position to make that decision, that she had lost her ability to make that decision. But either way, they continued with the exorcisms. The final exorcism of Annalise took place on June 30th, 1976. And while Annalise did submit willingly to this exorcism, she was incredibly frail. She weighed under 100 pounds. And by the following morning, on July 1st, 1976, she had passed away due to dehydration and malnutrition. She was only 23 years old. After her death, Annalise's story was so sensational that it grabbed headlines all over Germany, and people were clamoring to learn more about how this could happen. That she was, apparently possessed and then died after all these exorcisms. Why wasn't there medical intervention? There was so many questions. And so ultimately what happened is her parents were charged with negligent homicide, but were actually not given a jail sentence because at the time in Germany, they ruled that the parents had already suffered enough, so they did not serve any jail time. And there were two priests, one of them being Renz, who were charged with negligent manslaughter, and they were sentenced to 6 months in jail. That was later suspended. To this day, people are absolutely split down the middle about what actually happened to Annalise Michel. Was it possession, or was it, like the neurologist said, a form of epilepsy, or was it something else? And furthermore, was psychiatric treatment or was modern medicine doing enough to help her? Or were they failing just as much as the exorcisms ultimately failed? It's a question that to this day, people are really unsure how to answer. Her gravesite has become sort of like a monument for many churches around Europe. They will go and basically make the pilgrimage to her gravesite to pay their respects to a girl that they believe in some way died for their sins. So what do you think this was? Was this demonic possession, or was this epilepsy, or was it something else? And how do you think they should have treated this case? I mean, obviously the medication she was on was not making it any better, but at the same time, the exorcisms didn't seem to do much better either. So how do you treat something like this? Let me know in the comments what you think, and I'll do my best to respond to as many as I
I'll tell you, as a professional guide, as a hunter, as a botanist who goes out looking for plants and Indian ruins, this is the one mountain range I will not go into alone.
On the outskirts of Phoenix, Arizona sits the infamous Superstition Mountain Range, a grouping of massive peaks and landforms which have come to be known as some of the most haunted and most dangerous in the entire United States. While we were wrapping up our series of paranormal investigations in Arizona, we knew for a fact that we had to stop by the Superstitions to see just how haunted they were for ourselves. When we got into town for our investigation that night, we met up with Corey, a local professional guide who specializes in taking people hiking throughout various wildlife areas in Arizona, and we headed into the Superstitions wilderness. It's definitely a spooky walk, even in the daytime. The way that the land feels, how it speaks to you as you head down the twisting paths, and the power that the area has is indescribable. It's a very spiritual, yet also frightening experience. Corey is an insanely knowledgeable guide who researches the paranormal world as a side gig and knows a thing or two about the animal and plant life in these areas. For example, check out right here as he grabs a prickly pear cactus, lights it on fire to singe the needles off, and peels it back to give us a taste of the desert fruit. It was pretty insane how knowledgeable Corey was, and the fruit was pretty tasty. As we made our way back to a good vantage point where we could see the mountains and conduct our interview, I couldn't help but notice the stifling feel of the environment around the Superstitions. Something was off. I could feel it in my chest. This area has seen some crazy negative events in the past, and I'm sure it will see even more in the future. I guarantee that what Corey is about to tell you will blow your mind.
Let's let it pass. Fuck on my chi.
Spooky voices from the cactus field. So why don't you introduce yourself? You can look right at the camera, and then you got it.
All right. I'm Corey Daniel, professional guide down here out of Phoenix, Arizona. What else? I don't know where to go. Where do you want me to go? I'm Corey Daniel, professional guide down here in Phoenix, Arizona with the Paranormal Files, and we are standing on the northwest edge of the Superstition Mountain Range. What you're looking at here in the background is 5 interconnecting volcanic calderas, which are underground volcanic systems, which exploded or formed more appropriately a dome about 28 to 30 million years ago. And they used to be about 3 times higher than they are now. They have worn down over the years. Back when this was blowing up for about 5 to 8 million years, geologists believe, this whole area was uninhabitable. There was just gas and clouds and ash everywhere. These cliffs you're seeing right behind me are welded tough and tough. The Superstition Mountain Range is agreed upon by all geologists to be probably the most vicious and roughest mountain range in the lower 48 states. It is not a place to be taken lightly. There are deaths up here regularly every year from hikers, and that does not include the murders. It does not include the mysterious disappearances dating all the way back to the days of the Jesuits, and that's why we're talking about the Paranormal Files today. Everything in the Superstition Mountains centers around Apaches and gold. And it's ironic because there's never been any gold found in this mountain range. In fact, geologists say that this type of rock formation does not allow for gold. There's been gold all the way around it. If you go off to the west, we're gonna be at Goldfield in a little bit here, there is fields of gold. It's called Goldfield. And they mine gold there. One of the richest gold mines in the entire state historically has been in that little town, the ghost town that we're gonna be in. If you go to the other side, the town of Superior, Globe in Miami, Arizona, not Florida. There's gold all through there, and copper and other heavy metals as well, silver and some other stuff. But nothing really in the mountain range. That being said, the stories and the hunters and the gold hunters and treasure hunters have been coming out here for hundreds and hundreds of years. This mountain range it's gone by dozens of names. Today it's called the Superstitions. If you're a local, you know it as the Soups. If you want to sound like a Phoenician from Phoenix, we call them the Soups. It's had dozens and dozens of names depending on who was living here at the time. The Apaches knew this mountain range as the abode of the thunder gods, and they still refer to it as that. This mountain range, for some reason, and the geologists and the climatologists don't know, it makes weather. During the monsoon seasons and even for the winter rains, our rains are split in 2, January, February, and then July and August, by 4 months of drought on both sides. These mountain ranges can be just completely full of weather, and when it does, being a volcanic drainage, a decomposing caldera, you get floods coming out of Boulder Canyon, Peralta Canyon. I mean, crazy floods, and that's the flood that actually wiped out the town of Goldfield. We're going to be
checks. Now, we had heard him say on Air Force One that it was not going to be by Christmas, by the holidays, that it was going to be in 2026. Now we have a more definite response from him. Take a look at this. Trump promises to send $2,000 tariff dividend checks, probably the middle of next year, a little bit later than that, possibly as well, he is saying. Here's another one that has come out as well with more updates. Trump says $2,000 rebate checks will come by mid-2026. The Republican president doubled down on his proposal on Monday today, even setting a timeline for the $2,000 rebates. So not only is he saying you're going to get checks, he's giving you a time frame as to when you can expect the checks. In addition to that, now this came out yesterday, and I shared this with you when we had heard Trump's $2,000 tariff check requires new law. Bessent says we've heard from the Treasury Secretary, who has confirmed that they're going to try to get this done. They are working away. We heard the White House say we are committed to $2,000 checks going out to the American people. However, they're saying they are working to get legislation pushed through. Treasury Secretary weighs in on the $2,000 tariff dividend checks. Could you get one? Well, we're hearing as of the past 3 hours ago today, Donald Trump is saying you're going to get one. Here's when you're going to get one. And you're going to get those $2,000 dividend rebate checks, tariff checks, whatever you want to call them. But he's saying we're bringing in so much money that we're going to send everybody a nice little $2,000 check. And then after that, we're going to pay down the debt. Man, let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you like the sound of that, put 2K in the comments or drop a 47 for support for Donald Trump. Let me know down below in the comments. Now, in addition to that, also, if you haven't done so yet, please take a second, hit that thumbs up like button. Helps out the channel a ton while we're live. We are live right now. It is currently 5:22 p.m. Central Standard Time, and it is November 17th, 2025. And in the past 3 hours, we heard from the president from the White House. I'm going to play for you the video footage, and he has given the time frame, saying 2026, you're going to get checks. And if you appreciate the live streams, the updates, hit that like button for me. And also, to stay up to date, it's totally free. Why not hit the subscribe button? I'll keep you up to speed as things roll out. As you know, as things have been happening, I'm hopping on, getting you the latest information. When we heard it from Kevin Hassett, Scott Bessent, Donald Trump, the White House, as we get more and more updates on these $2,000 checks, I'm giving you the latest breaking news. This coming out just 3 hours ago today from the White House. Going to play the video footage for you. So to stay up to date, subscribe, hit the like button if you appreciate it. And as always, all the articles that I'm going to be referencing that have come out in the past couple of hours, they're hyperlinked in the description. I cite all the sources, put it on the screen, read right from it so you can see it for yourself and know and rest assured that this is the latest. So before we dive into the articles, let's take a look at what it was Trump actually had to say here so you can see it for yourself as he's answering questions in the White House just 3 hours ago. Let's go ahead and take a look at the video footage.
Ron, you're mentioning a disagreement head earlier.
We've taken in hundreds of billions of dollars in tariff money. We're going to be issuing dividends later on, somewhere prior to, probably in the middle of next year, a little bit later than that, of thousands of dollars for individuals of moderate income, middle income. We're going to pay down debt. We have a lot of money from tariffs. If we didn't have tariffs, this nation would be in serious trouble. And we've taken in tremendous amounts of money. And you know what's more important than that? We've protected our businesses from being raided like we did with the chip business. Now we're bringing them all back. But we had 100% of the chip industry, and then they left. They went mostly to Taiwan and South Korea, but mostly Taiwan. And they have almost 100%. And we're going to have, within a short period of time, a big percentage of the chip business are coming back because of tariffs, because they don't want to pay the tariffs, because the tariffs will be very steep if they don't come back, and they've committed to come back. As you probably heard, Apple is now up to $700 billion. We have NVIDIA at $600 billion. We have tremendous amounts of money pouring in. Our country has become amazing again and really, really rich again. I will say this. We have a decision we're waiting for. It's a very big decision. The numbers that we've taken in, if you talk about investments, is trillions, not with a B, not with an M, millions, but trillions of dollars. I can't imagine having to give that money back on something that we're allowed to do. And the ones that are fighting us are countries, largely. They're back in countries that have been ripping us off for years, using tariffs to rip us off. And now we're able to defend ourselves. It really is a matter of national security, because economic security is national security. So I think you're going to see another thing happening. I think you'll see food prices. They've come down very substantially since Biden. But I think you're going to see food prices coming down very substantially.
So there you have it, you guys. So we are going to be seeing that check here, middle of 2026. Now, after we saw him have this interview, he made this.
I surprised my kids with a cozy coloring session by the fireplace, and of course we're using Crayola Color Wonder mess-free coloring pages. My kids love these, and
see here, $2,000. Trump reveals when moderate income Americans can expect to get $2,000.
I'll tell you, as a professional guide, as a hunter, as a botanist who goes out looking for plants in Indian ruins, this is the one mountain range I will not go into alone.
On the outskirts of Phoenix, Arizona sits the infamous Superstition Mountain Range, a grouping of massive peaks and landforms which have come to be known as some of the most haunted and most dangerous in the entire United States. While we were wrapping up our series of paranormal investigations in Arizona, we knew for a fact that we had to stop by the Superstitions to see just how haunted they were for ourselves. When we got into town for our investigation that night, we met up with Corey, a local professional guide who specializes in taking people hiking throughout various wildlife areas in Arizona, and we headed into the Superstitions wilderness. It's definitely a spooky walk, even in the daytime. The way that the land feels, how it speaks to you as you head down the twisting paths, and the power that the area has is indescribable. It's a very